Welcome to Spice and Fiction. What if Belle were an elemental druid? Volume 1. In this alternate DanMachi timeline, Belle Cranel is not an adventurer, but a druid, one of the sworn protectors of Elyndor's Heartgrove. When a mysterious blight begins to corrupt the ancient forest, Belle sets out to uncover its source. But his journey soon entangles him in a war between three rival nations. Caught between his duty to the Heartgrove and the chaos of war, Belle must find a way to stop the spreading corruption and save the very forest he has sworn to protect. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, let the story begin. Chapter 1. When Nature Chooses Violence. Night lay over the ancient forest like a living veil. Above the sprawling canopy, the heavens glittered in solemn splendor, a deep black sea strewn with stars so bright and numerous that they seemed almost close enough to touch. The moon hung high and pale, vast and watchful, pouring silver light over the endless reaches of Elyndor's Heartgrove. In that light, the forest became something otherworldly, less a place of wood and leaf and root, and more a sleeping kingdom suspended between dream and memory. The great boughs of ancient trees stretched outward like the arms of titans, their leaves whispering as the night wind slipped through them in long, breath-like currents. Every branch swayed with gentle rhythm. Every vine stirred. The moss that clung to bark and stone shimmered faintly with moonlit dew, and soft blue fungi glowed in hidden hollows like fallen fragments of starlight. Here and there, drifting lights moved lazily between the trunks, small spirit moths, their translucent wings pulsing with pale green radiance, weaving through the dark like lanterns carried by unseen hands. The forest was not silent. It never had been. It breathed. It listened. It sang in a language too old for cities and too patient for men. Leaves rustled in layered murmurs overhead. Insects trilled from within the undergrowth with delicate persistence. Somewhere deeper within the trees, a nightbird let out a low, fluting call that echoed once and faded into the immense stillness. The wind moved through the Heartgrove as though it knew every branch by name, coaxing them into motion until the forest seemed to sway as one vast body. In the moon's glow, the trees looked like dancers moving upon a sacred stage, each trunk and branch casting long silver shadows over the roots below. Creatures of the night watched from that living audience. A pale-furred stag stood between thick pillars of bark, its antlers threaded with hanging moss and moonlight. A family of silver foxes paused on a fern-covered ridge, their ears twitching, their bright eyes reflecting the sky. High among the branches, feathered gliders folded their wings close and peered upward, while countless smaller live beetles, moths, hidden lizards, burrowing things beneath the roots went about their secret business beneath the gentle dominion of the moon. To most, it would have been only a forest. To others, it was a sanctuary. To the rare few who could feel its pulse, Elyndor's Heartgrove was alive in a way that cities could never understand. The air itself carried that truth. It smelled of cool bark, rich earth, flowering vines, and the faint sweetness of nectar blooming somewhere unseen. There was a damp freshness beneath it all, the scent of deep roots drinking underground rivers and ancient leaves returning to soil. Even the cold of the night felt clean here, soft against the skin, touched by dew and drifting pollen, rather than the dead chill of stone walls or mountain wind. For a while, the forest remained wrapped in that sacred performance. The moon held its place overhead. The stars watched. The wind sang its lullaby. And then the sky burned. A blazing sphere of fire tore across the heavens with a roar so violent that it seemed to split the night open. Its light was monstrous orange, gold, and white at its heart, trailing a tail of sparks and smoke that swallowed whole constellations as it passed. In an instant, the quiet silver world of moonlight was drowned beneath that brutal flare. The fireball crossed above the treetops like a fragment of a fallen sun and struck one of the floating ships in the distance. The impact came with a deafening explosion. For a heartbeat, the entire horizon flashed white. Then sound crashed through the forest. A thunderous boom rolled over the canopy, slamming into the trees hard enough to shake branches and send showers of leaves spiraling down through the air. Birds erupted from the upper reaches in panicked flocks. Animals bolted from the underbrush. The pale stag reared and vanished into the shadows in a spray of crushed ferns and damp soil. Far above the western edge of the Heartgrove, the struck vessel lurched violently. It was a skyship of lacquered wood and pale rune-lit metal, elegant even in silhouette, its long curved hull suspended beneath great crystal arrays that churned with wind magic and pale frostlight. Now its side had been torn open. Splintered timber burst outward in flaming arcs, spinning into the darkness. A section of its hull peeled apart like a broken ribcage, exposing jagged beams and glowing magical conduits within. Fire licked hungrily along its flank, devouring sailcloth and varnished wood while pieces of its outer shell rained down in burning fragments. The wrecked skyship listed, struggling to hold altitude. Around it, two more vessels banked sharply through the dark, their underbellies glowing with cold blue sigils. Lines of frost shimmered along their prows and railings. Mages stationed along their decks raised staffs crowned with storm crystals, and moments later the air howled. Dozens of spears of ice took shape in the sky. They formed in tight clusters, each one long as a hunting lance, translucent and jagged, their surfaces glowing with a pale, merciless sheen. Then they fell. The volley screamed downward. The first wave hammered into the earth with explosive force, shattering stone, uprooting brush, and bursting apart in sprays of frozen shards. Trees that had stood for centuries splintered beneath the impact. Bark exploded outward. Branches snapped and tumbled. The ground convulsed as if struck by giant hammers. Cold mist burst through the undergrowth, frosting leaves and roots in a breath before being swallowed by the heat of another incoming blast. At the forest's edge, something even larger emerged through smoke and ruin. It moved with dreadful deliberation, each step a grinding shriek of metal against metal. The crawler machine was immense, an iron behemoth supported by multiple segmented legs, each one thick as a watchtower trunk and jointed like the limbs of some monstrous insect. Plates of dark steel overlapped across its body like armor scales, glowing dull red along seams where inner furnaces blazed. Rows of rivets ran along its flanks, and chains as thick as ship anchors swung beneath its undercarriage, clanking with each ponderous movement. From its back rose smokestacks vomiting plumes of thick black exhaust into the heavens, so dense they smothered moonlight and spread across the stars like a creeping stain. The air around it trembled with heat. Every vent along its side exhaled bursts of furnace breath that reeked of coal, hot iron, sulfur, and something fouler beneath it, something oily and bitter that did not belong in any living forest. Its cannons thundered. Each discharge came with a concussion that slammed through the chest and left the air shaking afterward. Great iron barrels recoiled along its armored back, vomiting spheres of fire wreathed in smoke and ash. One after another, they streaked skyward toward the circling ships. Their passage lit the treetops in savage orange flashes, and wherever sparks fell, leaves curled black and smoldered. One shell missed its target and struck the slope below. The explosion punched a crater into the earth. Dirt, roots, and shattered stone erupted outward in a wave. Nearby saplings were snapped like brittle reeds. A ring of fire spread across crushed ferns and dry brush, racing outward until it met living green and began to climb hungrily upward. Resin popped inside trunks. Thick sap hissed as it boiled. Smoke rolled low between the trees, stinging eyes and coating tongues with bitterness. The forest's night song was gone now. In its place came chaos. Metal roared. Magic shrieked. Wood splintered. Fire crackled. Steam hissed. The sound of war devoured everything. More ice rained from above. Some spears buried themselves in the crawler's armored shell with bursts of white frost that spread rapidly across heated iron before being blasted away by furnace vents. Others missed and struck the forest around it. One ancient cedar took a spear through its upper trunk and split in half with a crack like a screaming limb. Its vast crown toppled through neighboring branches, crushing vines, nests, and undergrowth beneath its weight. Another volley struck a moonlit pool hidden among the roots, flash freezing its surface before the shockwave shattered it into 1,000 glittering fragments. The cold and heat clashed violently in the air. Steam rolled through the woods in ghostly walls, carrying the scent of burned leaves and ruptured sap. Where frost spread, the ground hardened and cracked. Where flames reached it next, mud bubbled and spat. Pollen turned to ash. Moss shriveled. Petals blackened and fell. Animals fled in blind terror. A pack of dire hearts burst through a curtain of hanging ivy, their hooves tearing up wet earth as they bounded deeper into the forest. Birds crashed through branches in disoriented swarms. Tiny creatures poured from burrows only to vanish beneath smoke and falling debris. Somewhere near the impact zone, a beast gave a raw, echoing cry of pain before it was swallowed by the grinding thunder of another cannonade. Even the living lights of the forest faltered. Spirit moths scattered in erratic trails, their gentle glow broken into frantic fragments as they darted between trunks and vanished into the deep. The blue fungi lining the roots seemed dimmer now beneath drifting ash. Leaves once silver beneath the moon came away coated in soot. The edge of Elyndor's Heartgrove had become a battlefield. The sky ships circled above like wounded predators, their rune lines blazing brighter as they poured wind and ice downward in relentless waves. The crawler pushed on below, unstoppable and furious, crushing brush and stone beneath its iron legs, as if the land itself were only another obstacle to be ground into submission. Behind it, shapes moved through the smoke, smaller war engines, armored soldiers, and the faint gleam of torch lines stretching beyond sight. And all around them, the forest suffered. A great root, exposed by a blast, writhed from the ground like the limb of something alive before collapsing beneath burning debris. A grove of white-barked trees caught between fire and frost split open along their trunks, their pale interiors steaming in the sudden shift of temperature. A curtain of vines hanging between two elder branches ignited at one end and froze at the other, sagging under twin destruction before breaking apart in brittle, smoldering pieces. The very air tasted wrong. No longer clean and cool, it carried cinders on the tongue and the coppery tang of ruptured earth. Breathing became harder near the edge of the battle. Smoke crawled low and thick beneath the trees, filling the spaces between roots, clinging to bark, gathering in the hollows where once only dew and moonlight had rested. And yet the Heartgrove did not feel dead. It felt wounded. Deep beneath the screaming metal, beneath the crack of ice and the roar of fire, there was something else, something slower, older, more terrible in its silence. The tremor that passed through the roots was not simply the result of artillery and impact. It was a shudder, a pain carried from tree to tree, root to root, as though the forest itself could feel every strike laid upon it. Leaves trembled where no wind touched them. The grass bent and rose in uneasy ripples. Farther in, beyond the immediate destruction, branches groaned softly in a language older than speech. Moonlight still touched the canopy overhead, but it no longer looked gentle. Now it seemed pale and helpless against smoke. The stars remained above, but many had vanished behind thick black clouds pouring from the crawler's stacks and the burning hull of the falling ship. Fire reflected against the undersides of those clouds, turning them the color of old bruises and molten iron. Each flash of cannon fire painted the trunks in alternating orange and white, turning every tree into a momentary specter. The night that had begun as a sacred performance had been torn apart and remade into something violent and profane. Still the battle raged. Another sky ship dipped lower, one side of its hull shredded and burning, its engines whining under strain as mages on deck struggled to stabilize it. Ribbons of frost magic spilled from its stern in shimmering trails. Below, the crawler angled its main battery upward with mechanical precision, iron gears grinding as glowing chambers rotated and locked into place. Heat shimmered around its barrels like a mirage. Somewhere between them, the forest endured the clash of two powers that saw it only as ground to be taken, cover to be burned, timber to be harvested, or obstacle to be erased. And among the ancient trunks, amid the smoke, fire, frost, and falling ash, Elyndor's Heartgrove stood beneath the moon like a wounded god, vast, silent, and alive. The clash of titans had already shattered the silence of the Heartgrove. But what came next was something far older than war. For a single breath, just one, the battlefield seemed to hesitate. The fire from the crawler's cannons dimmed as if smothered by unseen hands. The falling ice from the sky ship slowed, their descent no longer sharp and absolute but uncertain, wavering, like arrows loosed into a storm that no longer welcomed them. Even the wind, once torn apart by heat and magic, stilled into a tense, unnatural quiet. Then the forest answered. It did not roar. It did not scream. It moved. At first, it was subtle, so subtle that even the mages above did not understand what they were witnessing. The ground beneath the nearest trees trembled not with the violence of impact, but with intention. Roots shifted beneath the soil, sliding past one another with a wet, grinding sound. Vines coiled tighter along bark. Branches creaked not from the wind, but from strain. Then the earth split open. A mass of roots and vines surged upward with explosive force, tearing through soil and stone alike. Dirt erupted into the air as something vast began to rise, a shape forming not from a single tree, but from dozens, hundreds, all weaving together in a terrifying, unified motion. It became an arm, a colossal arm of living wood and root, thicker than the hull of a warship, twisting upward with violent purpose. Bark layered upon bark, vines tightening like muscle fibers, roots knotting together into something that resembled sinew. Leaves burst from its surface in a sudden, wild bloom, only to be torn away by the speed of its ascent. It reached for the sky. One of the crippled sky ships, already struggling to maintain its altitude, tried to pull away. Its runes flared brighter, engines screaming as the mages forced wind currents to push it higher. It was too late. The wooden arm closed around the vessel. The impact was not clean. It was crushing. The ship's hull groaned as ancient timber met living wood with a force that splintered beams and shattered rune lines. Cracks spiderwebbed across its side. The crystal arrays along its spine flickered violently before bursting into shards of light that scattered into the night like dying stars. Hold the altitude. A mage staggered across the tilting deck, one hand outstretched, storm crystal blazing at the tip of his staff. The wind answered, but not fully. It buckled, slipping from his control like a beast that no longer recognized its master. This isn't. The deck lurched beneath him. He fell hard, breath driven from his chest as the sky tilted into something wrong. And then, more arms grew. From that first massive limb, smaller tendrils erupted outward, dozens, then hundreds, each one branching and twisting, reaching into the sky with frantic, unstoppable hunger. They spread like a living web, ensnaring the remaining ships before they could escape. Vines wrapped around masts. Roots coiled around hulls. Branches pierced through decks. No, cut them. Cut them. Blades flashed. Magic flared. A young mage hacked desperately at a vine coiling around his leg, frost spilling wildly from his hands, but the cut sealed instantly, the wood knitting together faster than he could strike. There, healing. The sky itself seemed to be dragged downward. Ships that had ruled the heavens only moments before were pulled screaming toward the forest's edge. Their engines howled, magic flaring wildly in desperate resistance, but the forest did not yield. It tightened its grip with relentless patience, dragging them inch by inch until their keels scraped against the upper canopy, crushing leaves and branches beneath their weight before slamming them into the earth. The impact shook the ground. Wood splintered. Ice magic shattered. Screams brief, sharp, and human were swallowed by the thunder of destruction. Inside the wreckage, something worse began. The mages tried to rise. One pushed himself up on shaking arms, blood mixing with frost along his sleeve. His staff lay just beyond reach, its crystal dimming. Weak and still, he stopped. The deck beneath his hands was moving. They did not get far. Roots thin at first, almost delicate, slipped through cracks in the hull, through broken planks and shattered railings. They crept across the deck like searching fingers. No, stay back. They wrapped around ankles, around wrists, around throats. A mage clawed at the vines tightening around his neck, nails tearing against bark that felt both soft and unyielding. His eyes widened not in pain, but in disbelief. It's alive. Then they sank in. A gasp turned into a choke. A scream turned into silence. Another mage tried to cast, his voice breaking mid-incantation as roots pierced through his sleeve and into his arm. The spell collapsed into a flicker of dying light. Skin cracked not with blood, but with bark. Veins darkened, turning green and brown as something ancient pushed its way through flesh. Fingers stiffened, splitting into branching forms. Hair tangled into fine threads that hardened into moss and leaf. One by one, they became still. Their bodies rooted in place, transformed into twisted, half-formed trees that stood where men once fought. Some reached upward, frozen in the final moment of resistance. Others bent inward, as if bowing to something unseen. The skyships no longer moved. Above the battlefield, the heavens felt quiet. Below, the iron behemoth remained. For a moment, it did not understand. What happened to the sky fleet? A dwarf engineer braced himself against a shaking console, soot-streaked hands gripping iron as the machine slowed beneath him. Its cannon slowed, then halted. Steam hissed from its vents in uneven bursts as internal systems struggled to process what had happened. Its massive frame shifted, attempting to reorient, to target this new threat rising from the forest itself. Recalibrate. Turn the main battery now. Another barked the order, voice sharp with trained authority, but there was a tremor beneath it. Then the ground betrayed it. Beneath its segmented legs, the earth softened. That's not right. What had been solid ground only moments before turned viscous dark soil, melting into a churning, molten slurry that glowed faintly from within. Heat surged upward in waves, distorting the air. The crawler's massive limbs sank into it with a heavy, sucking sound. No, hold. Stabilizers drive them deeper. The machine tried to stabilize. Its legs extended, pistons driving downward to find purchase. There was none. The deeper they pushed, the more the earth gave way. It's swallowing us. Then the heat rose further. The ground beneath the behemoth ignited not in flame, but in pressure. Molten earth surged upward, forming shapes within the shifting mass. They were crude at first, barely defined, but then they hardened. Hands. Gigantic hands of molten stone and burning soil rose from the earth itself, their fingers curling and grasping. They seized the crawler's legs, its undercarriage, its armored sides. The iron plates hissed as heat met metal. The black vein, or that made up its structure, began to glow, faintly at first, then brighter. Red, orange, white. Shut it down. Shut it down. The machine roared as its internal systems overloaded. Steam exploded from its vents in violent bursts. Chains snapped. Rivets popped free and shot outward like shrapnel. Still, the hands did not release it. They pulled. Slowly. Inevitably. The crawler sank. Its legs disappeared beneath the molten earth. Its lower hull followed, dragged downward as if the world itself was reclaiming it. The cannons fired once wild, uncontrolled before falling silent as their barrels warped and bent under the heat. Inside, the engineers screamed. Or tried to. One staggered back from a ruptured panel, staring as thin roots slipped through the seams of the iron like threads of something alive. No. We sealed everything. Roots had already found them. Through vents. Through seams. Through the smallest cracks in iron. They slipped inside the machine like a creeping infection. A dwarf raised a wrench and struck at one coiling around his arm. The metal rang, but the root did not break. It tightened. Get it off, get it off. The same transformation took hold, flesh stiffening, limbs locking, bodies becoming something else entirely. Where once there had been men guiding machines, there were now silent forms rooted in place, their humanity swallowed by bark and growth. A final breath caught in one engineer's throat as his hands, once calloused from steel and fire, split into branching forms. His eyes widened, not in rage, but in something quieter. We built this. Outside, the molten hands tightened. Then, they cooled. The glowing earth hardened rapidly, sealing the behemoth in place. Steam erupted in thick clouds as heat met sudden stillness. When the mist cleared, the crawler stood half-buried, its massive form locked in a prison of stone and cooled magma. Its smoke ceased. Its cannons fell silent. The battlefield ended. What remained was not victory. It was quiet. A heavy, suffocating quiet that pressed down over the ruined forest like a weight. The fire still crackled in scattered patches, but even those seemed hesitant now. Frost clung to shattered ground. Smoke drifted in slow, uncertain spirals. The chaos had been erased. Not by man, but by the forest itself. At the edge of a nearby cliff, overlooking the entire broken expanse, a lone figure stood. Unmoving. Watching. For a moment, he did not breathe. The wind returned in soft, cautious breaths, tugging at the cloak draped over his shoulders. It was not a cloak of woven cloth, but something older stitched from layered hides, each piece carefully shaped and bound together. Faint patterns traced across its surface, formed from pressed leaves, carved bone fragments, and thin cords of vine that had grown into the material itself. Small talismans hung along its edges, animal teeth, polished stones, feathers that shimmered faintly in the dim light. His grip on the staff tightened just slightly. Not from fear. From something else. Upon his head rested a helm. It was shaped like the skull of a great wolf, elongated and fierce, its hollow eye sockets dark and unreadable. Antlers rose from its crown, branching outward in elegant, unnatural symmetry. They were not dead bone, but something in between, pale, smooth, and faintly alive, with thin veins of green light pulsing deep within their structure. In his hand, he held a staff. Ancient wood, darkened by age, yet unbroken. Its surface was carved with runes that spiraled upward in intricate patterns, each line etched with deliberate care. At its peak, a crystal rested, faceted and irregular, glowing softly in shifting hues of blue, green, and violet. The light pulsed slowly, like a heartbeat, casting faint reflections across the staff and the figure that held it. Power lingered around him. Not violently, not wildly, but steadily. And yet, that wasn't. The thought did not finish. The air near him felt different, alive. The scent of ash and iron faded the closer the wind drew to him, replaced by something cleaner, earth after rain, leaves after dawn, something ancient and untouched. The ground at his feet was unmarred, the grass bending gently rather than burned or frozen. But the forest, it had not moved like that before. Above him, the moon struggled behind the last drifting clouds of smoke. Its light broke through in fragments, slipping between the dark veils and pale beams. One such beam fell across the cliff, across the figure. For a brief moment, the shadows shifted. The helm caught the light. The antlers gleamed. And beneath the skull mask, something moved. Not a monster. Not a god. A boy. Young. Still. Silent. Watching the destruction below with eyes that reflected not the fire nor the frost, but the forest itself. And in those eyes, something unfamiliar lingered. Not fear. Not anger. Something closer to uncertainty. Then the wind shifted again. The light faded. And the forest, though scarred and broken, breathed once more. But deeper far beneath the roots, beneath the cooled stone and buried iron, something stirred in answer.
Like and subscribe for more DanMachi fanfiction.
Chapter 2. Beneath Fading Stars. Dawn came slowly over the lands east of the Heartgrove. It did not arrive with the gentle grace of moonlight through leaves, nor with the soft chorus of wind and birdsong that once defined the ancient forest. Instead, morning here broke through a haze of drifting smoke and low-hanging clouds, the sky painted in muted shades of iron gray and pale amber. The air carried a dry, metallic bite, sharp against the lungs, as if the land itself had forgotten what clean breath felt like. The road that cut through the plains was little more than a scar. Packed dirt hardened by years of traffic, its surface cracked in places where heat had baked it and churned into deep ruts where heavy machinery had passed. Blackened patches dotted the roadside, remnants of old fires that had long since burned out but left their mark etched into the soil. Sparse grasses clung stubbornly to life along the edges, their green dulled to a tired gray, bending under a wind that no longer carried the scent of life, only dust, ash, and the faint tang of oil. Far in the distance, the horizon rose in jagged silhouettes. Smokestacks. Dozens of them. They pierced the sky like blackened spears, exhaling thick plumes that stretched and spread until they merged with the morning clouds. Even from this far, the faint rumble of industry could be felt, a low, constant vibration that seemed to hum beneath the earth itself. Cinderhold lay somewhere behind that distant veil. A city of fire and iron, of hammer strikes and molten glow, of families like the coal veins. And on the road leading away from it, a lone machine moved forward with steady determination. The coal mover rumbled across the uneven terrain, its massive wheels grinding against stone and dirt with a rhythmic crunch. Steam hissed from vents along its sides, venting in short bursts that dissipated into the cool morning air. Its body was a fusion of raw industrial might and engineered precision, thick iron plating riveted together in overlapping layers, reinforced with angular guards that gave it the imposing presence of a battlefield tank. Yet its front was shaped more like a carriage, with a reinforced glass viewport framed in steel, allowing the driver a clear view of the road ahead. Inside, the engine roared. A deep, mechanical heartbeat. At its core, a mana engine pulsed, glowing faintly through protective casing, its inner crystal rotating slowly as streams of energy coursed through engraved channels. Pipes carried heat outward, feeding the steam systems that powered the mover's immense weight. Gears turned with measured precision, each movement perfectly aligned, each sound a testament to careful craftsmanship. Brannick Colvane sat firmly at the controls. His hands, already calloused despite his age, rested confidently on the steering levers. His eyes sharp, focus tracked every shift in the terrain ahead. Every vibration of the machine beneath him told him something. The resistance of the ground, the strain on the engine, the balance of pressure within the system. To anyone else, it might have been noise. To Brannick, it was language. The coal mover responded to him like a living thing, each adjustment of his grip guiding it smoothly along the road. He listened to the subtle changes in its rhythm, noting how the engine handled the incline, how the steam pressure rose and fell with each push forward. He had built this. Not entirely. Of course, the frame and base design came from established models, but the engine, the heart of it, that was his. And it was better, more efficient, more stable, more powerful than anything he had seen in Cinderhold. Yet even as pride flickered in his chest, it was quickly swallowed by something else. Restlessness. Cinderhold had nothing left to teach him. That thought had taken root months ago, and it had only grown stronger with time. Every forge he worked in, every blueprint he studied, every lecture he attended, it all felt familiar, predictable, small. Cragaroth was different. Cragaroth was where true innovation lived, where titan crawlers were forged, where the greatest minds of Ironforge pushed beyond limits others didn't even see. Brannick tightened his grip slightly on the controls. That was where he belonged. Not as one of many, but as one of the best. The coal mover rolled onward. The wind shifted, and something caught his eye. At first, it was just a shape, a disruption in the monotony of the roadside. Something lying near the edge of the dirt path, half hidden against the dry grass and scattered stones. Brannick's brow furrowed slightly as he leaned forward, squinting through the reinforced glass. A body. His foot instinctively eased pressure on the drive controls. The engine responded immediately, its roaring hum lowering into a controlled rumble as the coal mover slowed. Steam vented in a longer hiss this time, curling past the sides of the vehicle as it came to a gradual stop a short distance from the figure. Brannick stared for a moment, then exhaled sharply. By the forge. He pulled a lever, locking the engine into idle, and pushed the side hatch open with a metallic click. The door swung outward with a heavy creak, and a rush of cooler air entered the cabin, carrying with it the dry scent of the plains. He stepped down onto the dirt. The ground crunched under his boots as he approached cautiously. The figure was a boy. Younger than him, or at least, he looked it. White hair matted with dirt and sweat. Clothes torn and stained from travel. His skin was pale beneath the grime. His breathing shallow and uneven, like someone who had pushed far past their limit and had nothing left to give. Brannick crouched beside him. Hey. No response. He frowned and leaned closer. Oi, you alive? A faint movement. Barely there. The boy's lips parted, dry and cracked, and a single word slipped out, weak and hoarse. Thirsty. Brannick didn't hesitate. He reached to his side, unhooking a metal canteen from his belt. It was still half full, more than enough for the rest of his journey, but that calculation didn't even cross his mind. He uncapped it quickly and tilted the boy's head slightly. Here, drink. The reaction was immediate. The boy's hand shot up, not strong, but desperate, and grabbed onto the canteen. He pulled it toward himself and drank. Not in sips, not in measured gulps. He drank like someone who had never tasted water before, like someone who thought it might disappear if he stopped. The entire canteen was emptied in seconds. Brannick blinked. By the forge, he muttered again, a hint of disbelief creeping into his voice. He had seen exhaustion before, seen workers collapse after long shifts, seen soldiers come back from the front. But this was different. The boy lowered the canteen slowly, breathing heavier now, but steadier. A faint bit of color returned to his face, and his eyes clear, almost unnaturally bright, lifted to meet Brannick's. Thank you, he said quietly. Brannick scratched the back of his head, a bit awkward now. Yeah, well, don't mention it. There was a pause. Then the boy spoke again. I'm Bell Cranel. Brannick nodded once. Brannick Colvane. He shifted slightly, glancing at the road, then back at Bell. What are you doing out here, he asked. This stretch isn't exactly safe. Monsters come down from the hills sometimes. And with the war. He trailed off, shaking his head. Bell pushed himself up slowly, wincing slightly, but managing to sit upright. I'm heading to. He hesitated, brow furrowing as if wrestling with the words. Crag. Brannick's expression flattened. Cragaroth. Bell's face lit up slightly. That one. Brannick let out a short breath, something between a sigh and a laugh. Yeah. Figured. He studied Bell for a moment longer. There was something off. Not in a dangerous way, but strange. Like he didn't quite belong to the road he was standing on. Brannick shook the thought away. I'm heading there myself, he said. 2 days in already. Another day, and I should hit the outer gates. He jerked a thumb toward the coal mover behind him. You can ride with me if you want. Bell hesitated, not refusing, but thinking, as if weighing something deeper than the offer itself. Then Brannick added, almost casually. Got food in the back. Yes, please. The response came instantly. Brannick smirked slightly. Thought so. He stood and gestured toward the vehicle. Come on, I'll show you how to get in. Bell followed, slower but steadier now. When they reached the coal mover, he paused, staring at it with a mix of curiosity and uncertainty. You've never ridden one of these, have you? Brannick asked. Bell shook his head. No. Huh. Brannick opened the side hatch wider. Well, don't worry. It's not complicated. Just don't touch anything unless I tell you to. He climbed in first, then extended a hand to help Bell up. Bell took it. His grip was lighter than expected, but there was something steady in it. Not weak. Just restrained. Brannick pulled him inside. The hatch closed with a heavy clang. The engine hummed beneath them. And as Brannick returned to the controls, guiding the coal mover back onto the road, he cast a brief glance at his new passenger. Bell sat quietly, hands resting on his knees, eyes moving slowly around the interior of the machine. There was no fear there, only curiosity. and something else. Something Brannick couldn't quite place. He turned his attention back to the road. "Guess I'll have to show you how real engineering works," he muttered. The coal mover surged forward once more, steam hissing as it carried them deeper toward Cragaroth. And the road stretched on ahead. By the time the sun began to sink, the road had turned the color of old copper. All afternoon, the coal mover had rumbled steadily across the hard-packed dirt, its iron weight pressing deep grooves into the earth, while the horizon slowly changed beneath the fading light. The smokestacks of distant foundries were only smudges now, dark brushstrokes against a sky streaked with molten orange, rust red, and violet. The wind had grown cooler as evening approached, carrying with it the dry smell of open land, weathered stone, and the faint metallic tang that seemed to cling to every road leading deeper into iron-forged territory. Inside the cabin, the steady thrum of the mana engine had become almost hypnotic. Pipes clicked softly as heat moved through them. Gears turned with a measured rhythm beneath the floorboards. Every now and then the vehicle hit a rut in the road, and the whole frame gave a heavy jolt, making the reinforced panels creak and the tools hanging from the side brackets clink against one another. Bell, though still quiet, had long since stopped looking alarmed at every new sound. He watched everything instead, every lever Brannick touched, every gauge that shifted, every hiss of steam that escaped from carefully controlled vents. There was a seriousness in the way he observed, as if even this strange machine was something worth understanding rather than merely enduring. Brannick kept one hand on the control lever and squinted ahead through the front viewport. The light was falling faster now. Shadows stretched longer across the road. The dips and rises in the terrain were becoming harder to judge, especially where the dirt path narrowed between uneven slopes and scattered rock. He knew the coal mover could keep going. The engine was sound, the pressure levels were stable, and his custom-built mana core still had enough output to carry them well into the night. But that wasn't the point. Roads like these became dangerous after sundown. Not because the machine would fail, because visibility did. One missed rut, one bad incline, one hidden washout in the dark, and even a well-made vehicle could roll, break an axle, or slide into a ditch deep enough to trap it until morning. That was before accounting for beasts, prowlers, or scavenger packs that liked to shadow the roads at night. Brannick clicked his tongue, then eased the controls. "We're stopping," he said. Bell looked up. "Here. For tonight, yeah." The coal mover groaned as Brannick guided it off the main road and toward a nearby clearing. It wasn't large, but it was open enough to work with a flattened patch of dirt bordered by low brush, a few twisted shrubs, and several squat trees that leaned away from the wind as if they had spent years enduring it. The clearing sat just far enough from the road to keep them from being in plain sight, but close enough that getting back on the path at dawn would be easy. Brannick turned the wheel slowly, angling the heavy machine so its front faced slightly against the evening wind. The vehicle crunched over loose stone and dead grass, then settled with a low metallic shudder when he finally brought it to a stop. He waited a moment, listening. The engine was still strong. No irregular knocks. No strain in the pressure lines. Satisfied, he reached for a sequence of brass levers mounted beside his seat and pulled them one at a time. Each movement triggered a different response within the machine. The main drive disengaged with a dull clunk. Secondary pressure valves rotated open. The mana engine's fierce internal roar softened into a lower, controlled thrum, still powerful, but no longer aggressive. A moment later, several vents along the sides and rear of the coal mover released long streams of steam that curled into the cooling air in ghostly white ribbons. The sound was sharp at first. Hiss, 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 then faded into softer breaths as the systems settled into night mode. Brannick nodded to himself. "That'll do." He pushed open the side hatch and climbed down, boots landing with a crunch on the dirt. The evening air struck his face cool and dry. It smelled of dust, heat bleeding out of stone, and distant vegetation tough enough to survive this kind of land. Behind him, Bell hesitated a moment, clearly unsure of the mechanism, so Brannick reached up and pulled the door wider from the outside. "Careful with the step," he said. Bell climbed down more awkwardly than gracefully, one hand briefly steadying himself against the iron frame. Once both feet touched the ground, he glanced around the clearing with that same quiet alertness he seemed to bring to everything. The dying sunlight lit the edges of his white hair in pale gold, though the rest of him still looked travel-worn. Clothes dusty, posture a little too tense, like someone not used to resting while exposed. Brannick didn't comment on it. He just moved to the rear of the coal mover. The back hatch was thicker than the side door, reinforced with locking bars and heat-lined edges. He undid the clamps, braced his shoulder against it, and swung it open. The inside of the storage compartment was deeper than a normal trunk, more like a compact iron-walled supply room fitted into the rear of the vehicle. Tools hung in neat rows. Crates were strapped to the sides. Hooks carried rolled bedding, spare hose lines, cooking kits, and bundled tarps. The smell inside was a mixture of oiled metal, dried provisions, coal dust, and the faint mineral scent of mana stone. Brannick crouched and began pulling out a set of flat metal plates stacked along the side. Each one was about as tall as Belle's chest and broad enough to act as a partial barrier, with thick edges and a small mechanical housing at the base. He carried the first one several paces from the coal mover, planted it upright in the dirt, then pulled a small lever built into its frame. With a sudden, violent thunk, piston-like spikes shot downward from the bottom of the plate and drilled into the ground. Belle flinched slightly. Brannick smirked. "Anchors," he said, carrying over the next plate. "Keeps them from tipping. Also makes a decent perimeter." He placed another, then another, spacing them with practiced precision. Belle watched him intently the entire time, eyes following every movement. There was nothing casual in that attention. He studied Brannick's work the way a craftsman might study another craftsman, even if he didn't understand the tools yet. Brannick had noticed that since earlier. Belle watched everything, not with the idle curiosity of someone bored. With focus, like he was trying to understand how this world fit together. "I've been doing this every night since I left Cinderhold," Brannick said while positioning the fourth plate. "These help with wind, give some cover, and keep smaller monsters from wandering too close." He glanced back over his shoulder. Not perfect, but better than sleeping in the open and hoping nothing takes an interest. Belle nodded once. "It's smart." Brannick pretended not to enjoy hearing that as much as he did. Once the plates were arranged in a rough protective shape around the coal mover and a patch of ground large enough for them to camp in, he returned to the storage compartment and dug out a shallow metal basin, a pouch of dark coal-like stones, an ignition rod, and a hammer from the nearby toolbox. Belle stepped a little closer. Brannick knelt and arranged the stones carefully inside the basin, fitting them together like pieces of a puzzle. They were not common coal, though they looked close enough at first glance, dark, angular, faintly glossy. Veins of reddish-brown shimmered beneath their surfaces whenever they caught the light just right. He took the ignition rod, placed its tip into a small slot between the stones, and gave it a firm strike with the hammer. Clang! A burst of sparks leapt free. They rose in a lazy swirl, orange flecks dancing in the dim air like fireflies made of iron. When the sparks landed on the arranged stones, the whole cluster caught at once. Not explosively, smoothly. A low, red-orange glow awakened inside the basin, then deepened into steady flame. Heat rolled upward almost immediately, carrying with it a dry mineral smell and a comforting crackle. Belle's eyes widened just a little. Brannick noticed. "It's treated forge coal," he said, not quite able to stop himself from slipping into explanation. "Burns cleaner than raw fuel. Better for travel. Less smoke, steadier heat." Belle crouched slightly to study it. The firelight reflected in his eyes. "You made that too?" Brannick straightened a little. "Modified it." That was not the same thing as boasting, he told himself. By the time he finished setting things in order, the camp had taken shape. Sleeping rolls were spread on the flattest stretch of ground inside the metal perimeter. The basin fire sat near the center, giving off enough warmth to push back the evening chill. Brannick pulled down an iron-framed cover from the top of the coal mover and extended it outward so it formed a slanted roof over part of the camp, shielding them from wind and any light rain that might come later. It locked into place with several satisfying clicks. The clearing had changed with the sun's descent. The last orange light bled away behind distant hills, leaving the sky a deepening violet. One by one, the first stars began to appear overhead, sharp and cold. The wind moved through the brush with a dry whisper. Somewhere farther out, beyond the reach of the basin's glow, something small rustled through scrub and then went still. The land felt emptier at night than it had during the day, bigger, quieter, more willing to let a man notice how alone he really was on the road. Belle sat on a log Brannick had dragged over from the nearby scrub line. It wasn't elegant, but it worked well enough for a seat. Firelight flickered across the side of Belle's face, softening the exhaustion that still lingered there. He looked less like someone barely holding himself together now, and more like a tired boy trying very hard not to seem tired. Brannick busied himself with supper. From the storage compartment, he pulled out a shallow pan, strips of dried meat wrapped in cloth, a loaf of hard travel bread, and a metal container of preserved stew thickened with root vegetables and whatever seasoning had survived the trip. He set the pan over the forge coal basin and listened as it warmed with a low metallic tick. Soon the smell of heating fat and salted meat began to spread through the camp, mixing with the scent of iron, warm stone, and cooling earth. Bel's attention shifted. Brannick did not miss the way his posture straightened, or the way his eyes followed the pan, or the very clear, very human look of intense interest that appeared the moment the stew began to simmer. A faint sound escaped Bel before he could stop it. Not a word. Just the unmistakable swallow of someone trying not to look hungry while very obviously being hungry. Brannick fought down a grin. He tore the bread into portions with practiced hands, turned the meat until its edges crisped slightly, and stirred the stew until the preserved stock loosened into something thick and fragrant. Steam rose from the pan carrying the savory smell of herbs, salt, rendered fat, and softened root mash. It wasn't fine food. It was road food. Heavy, practical, and meant to keep a person moving. But in the cooling dark, it smelled incredible. When it was ready, Brannick portioned a serving onto a metal plate, added a share of bread, and handed it to Bel with a set of utensils. Careful, it's hot. Bel accepted it with both hands. Thank you. For about 3 breaths, he ate with what might generously be called restraint. Then hunger won. Brannick had barely started on his own portion when Bel had already cleared most of his plate. Not messily, not rudely, just with astonishing speed, like every bite had been competing with the next for survival. Brannick stared. Bel took another bite, paused, seemed to realize he was being watched, and swallowed. Sorry, he said. Brannick barked out a short laugh despite himself. You don't eat like a normal person. Bel looked faintly embarrassed. I was very hungry. I noticed. He looked down at Bel's plate. Empty. Then back up at Bel. Then back at the pot. You want seconds, don't you? Bel's answer came with painful honesty. Yes, please. Brannick shook his head in disbelief and scooped him another helping. This time Bel at least waited until Brannick had taken a few more bites of his own meal before diving back in, though the second serving vanished almost as quickly as the first. The sight was ridiculous enough that Brannick couldn't stop the amusement tugging at the corner of his mouth. The two of them ate beneath the iron awning while the fire crackled low between them. For a while, nothing needed to be said. The road was quiet. The coal mover rested behind them, its engine still humming in a lower night thrum, warm metal ticking softly as it cooled in stages. The barrier plates stood firm around the camp, their dark surfaces catching and losing firelight in alternating pulses. Overhead, more stars emerged as the last trace of daylight disappeared from the world. And in that little pocket of heat and iron and simple food, the strange boy from the roadside and the dwarf engineer on his way to greatness shared a meal like travelers who had known each other longer than a single day. The fire had settled into a steady, patient glow by the time their plates lay empty beside them. The basin coals no longer flared with bright tongues of flame, but burned deep and red at their core, heat rising in slow, even waves that pushed back the chill of the open night. Now and then, a faint crackle would break the quiet as one of the treated stones shifted, sending up a small burst of sparks that drifted lazily before vanishing into the dark. The wind had softened. It no longer pressed harshly against the metal plates or tugged insistently at the edges of their makeshift shelter. Instead, it moved in long, quiet breaths, brushing across the clearing and slipping between the iron barriers with a low whisper. It carried with it the dry scent of the plains dust, distant scrub, and cooling earth, but softened now, gentler than it had been during the day. Beyond the perimeter of plates, the land stretched wide and open. Dark, silent, vast in a way that made the small circle of firelight feel like its own separate world. Above them, the sky spread endlessly. Bel tilted his head slightly, his gaze lifting toward it. There are fewer of them here. Brannick, who had been absently scraping the last of the stew from his plate with a piece of hardened bread, paused mid-motion. Fewer what? The stars. That made him stop completely. Brannick leaned back onto his hands, the metal plate resting loosely on his knee, and followed Bel's line of sight upward. The sky was clear, or it looked clear at first glance. But the longer he stared, the more the imperfections revealed themselves, a faint, almost invisible haze stretching across the upper sky. It wasn't thick enough to block everything, but it dulled the brilliance of what lay beyond. The stars were still there, scattered in their distant patterns, but many seemed dimmer. Some were barely visible at all, swallowed by that thin smear of lingering smoke that never truly left Ironforge lands. Yeah, Brannick said after a moment, his voice quieter than before. You get used to it. Bel didn't answer right away. His eyes remained fixed upward, steady, as if trying to find something that wasn't quite there anymore. They were brighter where I came from, he said at last. Clear, like you could see all the way through them. Brannick snorted lightly, though without real bite. Sounds like you came from somewhere boring. Bell blinked once and turned his head slightly. Boring. No smoke, no noise, nothing being built. Brannick shrugged, gesturing vaguely around them. Yeah, sounds boring. Bell looked back at the sky. It wasn't. There was no defensiveness in the words. No argument. Just quiet certainty. Brannick studied him for a second, then looked away again, shifting his weight slightly against the packed dirt. Where exactly did you come from, anyway? He asked. You weren't kidding earlier. You don't look like you belong on any road I know. Bell hesitated. Not long, but enough to notice. From a forest, he said finally. That narrows it down to about half the continent. A big one. Brannick huffed a short breath, shaking his head. Helpful. Bell seemed to think for a moment, then added, It's quiet there. Brannick glanced sideways at him. Quiet how? No machines. No smoke. Just wind, leaves, water. Bell paused slightly, searching for the right words. You can hear everything. Brannick let out a low breath through his nose. Yeah, that'd drive me insane. Bell turned toward him a little more, faint confusion in his expression. Why? Because silence means nothing's happening. Brannick lifted a hand and tapped the side of the coal mover behind him with the back of his knuckles. The metal gave a dull, solid thunk. This is something happening. Movement. Progress. His voice gained a bit more strength as he continued, the familiar rhythm of his own beliefs settling into place. You build something, it moves. You improve something, it works better. You take what you've got and make it stronger, faster, more efficient than it was before. Bell's gaze dropped, briefly tracing the edges of the metal plates surrounding them. Firelight flickered across their surfaces, reflecting in hard, angular glints. Better for who? He asked. Brannick didn't answer immediately. The question lingered longer than expected. For people, he said after a moment. For us. You think food grows on its own everywhere? You think roads just appear? Machines make that possible. Cities make that possible. He gestured out into the darkness beyond their camp. Places like this stay empty unless someone does something about it. Bell was quiet. The wind slipped between them again, stirring the edges of the fire. The forest grows on its own, Bell said. Brannick smirked faintly. Yeah? And how many people does it feed? Bell didn't respond right away. His eyes lifted again, drawn back to the dim stars above, as if measuring something that couldn't quite be explained in numbers. Enough, he said, though softer this time. Brannick watched him for a second, then shook his head and leaned back again, resting his weight more comfortably on his arms. You're strange, you know that. Bell looked at him. I've been told that. Yeah, I'm not surprised. A faint silence followed. Not uncomfortable. Just present. The fire crackled softly. The coal mover hummed behind them, its engine maintaining that low, steady thrum that spoke of contained power and controlled design. Somewhere beyond the reach of their light, something small moved through the brush quick, cautious, then stopped, as if deciding the camp wasn't worth the risk. Brannick glanced back up at the sky again. Cragaroth is worse, he said. Bell tilted his head slightly. Worse. Stars, I mean. You won't see many at all once we get close. He shrugged. Too much smoke. Too much light from the forges. Bell's gaze lingered upward. That's a shame. Brannick scoffed lightly. You say that now. Wait until you see it. He paused. Something in his expression shifted, not quite pride, not quite something softer, but close to both. It's worth it, he added, quieter this time. Bell turned his head slightly, watching him now instead of the sky. Brannick exhaled slowly, then pushed himself up into a more upright position, resting his elbows on his knees. You know why I'm going there? He asked. Bell shook his head once. Brannick's eyes flicked toward the coal mover. Then beyond it, toward something only he could see. My family. The coal veins we've been building engines since Iron Forge started becoming what it is now, he said. Not just forges, not just tools, engines. There was a note of something deeper in his voice now. Legacy, expectation, pride. They were part of the first group that figured out how to bind mana into a stable mechanical system. The first real mana engine. He let out a short breath. Back then, it was crude, unstable, barely efficient, but it worked. Bell listened quietly. Brannick continued. That changed everything. Machines didn't have to rely on raw fuel alone anymore. You could amplify output, control it, scale it. He tapped the side of the coal mover again, more deliberately this time. This engine? Mine's better than anything I saw back in Cinderhold. More stable flow, less waste, higher output ratio. Bell looked at the machine with new attention. You made it. Modified it, Brannick corrected automatically. Then, after a beat. But yeah, it's mine. He leaned forward slightly, his voice lowering just a fraction. But that's not enough. Bell tilted his head. Brannick's gaze lifted again, not to the stars, but somewhere beyond them. I don't just want to build good engines, he said. I want to build the best. The words settled into the night. Firm. Certain. I want my name to be remembered in Ironforge history. Not just as another coal vein. Not just as someone who followed what came before. His hand tightened slightly against his knee. I want to create something no one's ever made before. Bell watched him closely now. What kind of engine? He asked. Brannick's eyes gleamed faintly in the firelight. A mana engine with output 10 times stronger than anything currently in use. He let the idea hang for a moment before continuing. Not just for vehicles. Not just for weapons. His voice dropped, almost reverent. For cities. Bell's expression shifted subtle, but noticeable. Brannick went on. An engine that could power an entire city on its own. Forges. Lights. Defenses. Everything. No shortages. No limits. The fire popped softly between them. Something that changes everything again, he said. Something quiet settled over the clearing after that. Not disagreement. Not agreement. Just the weight of a dream spoken aloud. Bell looked at the coal mover. Then at the fire. Then back toward the sky, where the dim stars still struggled against the faint haze above. That's a big dream, he said. Brannick smirked faintly. Yeah. He leaned back again, resting his hands behind him. That's the point. Bell didn't argue. But he didn't look away from the sky either. And for a while, the two of them sat in that small circle of warmth and iron and quiet ambition, beneath a night that held both fading stars and something still waiting to be built.
Like and subscribe for more DanMachi fanfiction.
Chapter 3. No Name at the Gate. Morning came not with silence, but with motion. The cool night air that had once drifted gently across the plains still lingered in the early hours, clinging to the ground in thin layers of chill that seeped through cloth and skin alike. It carried faint traces of dust, iron, and distant smoke, whispering through the low shrubs and twisted trees that lined the roads of the Ironforge Empire. Branches stirred softly, their leaves rustling in quiet murmurs as if finishing the last notes of a lullaby meant only for the night. Then the sun rose. It did not creep, it broke. A brilliant arc of gold pushed itself above the horizon, flooding the land with radiant light that burned away the dim gray of dawn. The sky shifted rapidly, from muted ash to pale blue streaked with amber, until the entire world seemed washed in warmth and clarity. Shadows shrank. Details sharpened. The distant smoke columns turned from dark silhouettes into thick, roiling pillars of black and brown. Life stirred in response. Small creatures emerged from burrows and crevices. Birds cut through the morning air in sharp, swift arcs. Even the sparse vegetation seemed to lean slightly toward the light, drinking it in as best it could. And on the rocky road cutting through that waking land, the coal mover rumbled forward once more. Steam vented in short, controlled bursts as the machine adjusted to the cooler morning air. The mana engine pulsed steadily beneath its reinforced shell, its glow faint but constant, like a second heartbeat layered beneath the mechanical rhythm of gears and pistons. Inside, Brannick worked the controls with practiced ease. One hand rested on the main steering wheel, a thick, iron-rimmed circle reinforced with grip segments, while the other moved between levers and dials mounted along the console. Each adjustment was precise, intentional. The vehicle responded smoothly, turning where needed, adjusting speed with subtle shifts rather than abrupt force. The morning light reflected off the interior panels, glinting against brass fittings and polished edges. It gave everything a sharper definition: the gauges, the pipes, the etched lines of mana channels embedded within the engine housing. Bell watched. Not casually, but intently. His gaze moved from Brannick's hands to the controls, then to the subtle responses of the machine itself. Every shift of the wheel, every pull of a lever, every hiss of steam seemed to draw his attention. It was remarkable. The dwarves had built something that moved without beasts, without reins, without the need for rest or breath. Just motion, guided by hands and thought and design. Bell's fingers curled slightly against his knees as he observed, his eyes reflecting the glow of the engine's core. His goddess had spoken of such things in passing. Machines, cities of smoke, progress built from stone and fire. But seeing it, feeling it, that was different. His body felt alive. The sunlight filtering through the viewport warmed his skin, and with it, something deeper stirred. Mana moved within him like a quiet current, flowing through every fiber of his being. It responded to the light, to the open sky, to the living world beyond the machine. It was subtle, but unmistakable. A steady, strengthening presence. He closed his eyes briefly and felt it. The earth beneath the road. The distant whisper of wind brushing through dry grass. The faint, stubborn pulse of life clinging to the edges of this land. Even here, it was still there. Brannick spoke suddenly, breaking the quiet. "Sun's finally up," he said, adjusting a dial with a small turn. "Makes driving a lot easier." Bell opened his eyes again. He hadn't realized. Brannick had been struggling earlier. Not visibly. Not obviously. But now, under the full clarity of daylight, his movements were smoother. More confident. The machine responded more cleanly, less hesitant in its adjustments. Bell's gaze lingered on him. "You're very skilled," he said. Brannick snorted lightly. "Of course I am." But there was a hint of satisfaction in his voice. Bell looked back at the road ahead. And for a moment, he simply watched. The land stretched forward, changing slowly as they moved. The soil grew darker. The air heavier. The distant smoke columns thicker. The world felt different. Then, something shifted. It was not visible. Not at first. But Bell felt it immediately. A line. An unseen boundary. The moment the coal mover crossed it, his body reacted. His breath caught. The steady flow of mana within him so calm, so natural, just moments before suddenly twisted. It surged, then faltered, like a current disrupted by something unnatural. His fingers tightened. His stomach dropped. A cold wave passed through him, followed by a sharp, nauseating pull that made his vision blur for a split second. He leaned slightly forward, gripping the edge of his seat. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The mana around him. No. The mana within him. It was unstable. Like it was being pushed. Pulled. Distorted. Brannick glanced at him briefly, then again through the small mirror mounted beside the steering wheel. "You all right?" he asked. Bell forced a small smile. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "I feel sick." Brannick frowned slightly, but his hands remained steady on the controls. "Probably travel sickness," he said. "Happens sometimes. Especially first time in a mover." Bell nodded slowly. But he knew. This wasn't that. This was something else. The deeper they went, the worse it became. The air felt heavier. Thicker. Like something unseen pressed against him from all directions. His mana recoiled. Not violently, but unwillingly. As if it didn't belong here. As if it was being rejected. His stomach twisted. For a moment, he thought he might actually be sick. Then, Brannick pointed forward. There. Bell lifted his head. And saw it. Cragaroth. Even from this distance. It was massive. The gates alone rose like a wall against the horizon. Towering structures of iron and reinforced stone that dwarfed everything around them. Behind them, the city climbed upward, built into and around the body of an active volcano. Layers of blackened structures stacked upon one another, connected by bridges, pipes, and massive mechanical frameworks. Smoke poured endlessly into the sky. Thick, black, unrelenting. It spread outward like a disease, staining the once blue heavens into something darker. The closer they got, the worse Bell felt. The mana around him twisted more violently now, unstable currents pushing against his senses. It wasn't just the air. It was the land. The city. Something within it. His chest tightened. Does the city have something wrong? Or did they build something that interfered with it? Half an hour passed, and the gates loomed before them. Massive. Overwhelming. Constructed from layered iron plates reinforced with thick stone supports, their surfaces covered in soot, oil stains, and etched runic lines that pulsed faintly when active. Thick pipes ran along their sides, venting bursts of heated air that shimmered visibly in the sunlight. Hydraulic systems groaned and shifted along the hinges, massive gears turning slowly as if the gates themselves were alive. Heat radiated from them. Not enough to burn, but enough to feel. Bell swallowed. Then he saw them. 2 iron golems stood on either side of the gate. Silent. Immovable. Their forms were bulky and compact, with thick torsos and elongated arms that hung low, almost reaching their knees. Their legs were shorter, sturdier, built for stability rather than speed. At the center of their chests, a glowing red core pulsed rhythmically steady, like a mechanical heart. Steam hissed softly from joints. Gears clicked. Brannick nodded toward them. "Iron golems," he said. "One of the best things Ironforge ever made." Bell stared. "They're alive." "Not really," Brannick replied. "They're machines. But they can use mana. Earth magic, mostly. Stabilization, defense, suppression. Built by blacksmith engineers and priest engineers working together." His eyes gleamed slightly. "That's why I'm going to Cragaroth. To learn how they work." Before Bell could respond, a voice rang out. "Halt." Vehicle STOP for inspection. The command rang out with mechanical precision, sharp and absolute. Brannick reacted instantly. The coal mover hissed as he pulled back on the control levers, steam venting in short bursts as the machine slowed. The heavy wheels ground against stone before settling into a complete stop just short of the massive gate. Routine, Brannick muttered under his breath, though his grip on the controls tightened slightly. Iron Wardens. Two figures approached. Their boots struck the ground in synchronized, deliberate steps measured, disciplined. Each movement spoke of training drilled into muscle and bone. Their armor was not ornamental. It was built for enforcement, layered steel plates reinforced with riveted segments, etched with the insignia of Ironforge authority. Pipes ran along parts of the plating, faint heat radiating from them with every step. They stopped beside the mover. One stepped forward. Present your forge sigil plate. The tone was firm, professional. Not hostile, but not open to negotiation. Brannick nodded once. Just a second. He worked quickly, pulling a sequence of levers. With a solid mechanical click, his seat slid backward along a metal track. He reached behind him, opening a secured compartment, rummaging only briefly before retrieving a metal plate the size of a parchment dark steel, engraved with precise markings. He handed it over without hesitation. The warden accepted it and inspected it carefully. Brannick Colvane, he read aloud. Dwarf. Origin, Cinderhold. Trade, blacksmith engineer. There was a pause. A subtle shift. His eyes lingered on the insignia etched into the plate. The Colvane crest. The second warden leaned slightly closer, just enough to confirm. Recognition came immediately. Your family is honored within Ironforge, the first warden said, his tone adjusting, still professional, but now edged with respect. Founders of early mana engine systems. Your lineage is well recorded. Brannick inclined his head. Thank you. There was a flicker of pride there, but it didn't last. Because the second warden had already turned. And you, he said, directing his gaze toward Bell. Present your forge sigil plate. Bell hesitated. Just for a second. Then he reached into his clothing and pulled out the small wooden plaque, holding it carefully before offering it forward. The moment it changed hands, everything shifted. The warden's expression hardened. This is not valid. Bell blinked, caught off guard. It has my name. Wooden identifications are not recognized within the Ironforge capital. The warden interrupted, voice sharper now, but still controlled. Nor within any sanctioned territory under its authority. The warmth from before disappeared, replaced by protocol. The second warden turned his head slightly toward Brannick. You brought an unregistered individual to the capital gates. There was no accusation in his tone, only fact, which somehow made it worse. Brannick's jaw tightened. He's just. A sharp whistle cut through the air. Loud. Piercing. Final. The response was immediate. The two iron golems moved. Their massive frames shifted with a deep metallic grind, pistons hissing as they stepped forward. Each step made the ground tremble faintly beneath their weight. They repositioned behind the coal mover, sealing off the path of retreat with silent, overwhelming presence. Brannick's chest tightened. This was bad. Worse than bad. His eyes flicked toward Bell, then back to the wardens. Think. Say something. Fix it. But the words didn't come. Because this wasn't just a misunderstanding anymore. This was a violation. And his name, his family was attached to it. The warden beside Bell moved. Fast. Precise. His hand closed around Bell's arm in a firm, practiced grip, one that allowed no room for struggle but did not immediately escalate to violence. Step down from the vehicle. Bell didn't resist. But the moment the warden's hand made contact, something inside him reacted. Violently. The mana within his body twisted, recoiling sharply as if struck. His breath caught in his throat, a cold wave crashing through him as the invisible pressure around him intensified. His instincts screamed. Move. Respond. Defend. The earth answered. For a split second, he felt it. The ground beneath him. The roots. The faint network of life buried beneath stone and soil. They stirred. Called by him. Thin cracks formed along the hardened dirt beneath his feet. Small weeds pushed through. Fragile. Desperate. Trying to answer. But then, something pushed back. Hard. An unseen force pressed down on his mana, distorting it, breaking the connection before it could fully form. The roots withered before they could rise. The weeds trembled, then stopped. Bell's vision blurred. His body weakened instantly, exhaustion hitting him far too fast for such a small effort. His knees nearly buckled. The warden tightened his grip, slightly not in aggression, but in control, keeping Bell steady. Bell's chest rose and fell unevenly. That wasn't normal. That wasn't supposed to happen. Why can't I? The mana wouldn't respond. Or rather, it was being suppressed. Brannick saw it. The movement. The cracks. The weeds. His eyes widened slightly. He tried to use magic. A surge of frustration hit him. Say something. Do something. But his gaze shifted again. To the wardens. To the insignia. To the golems behind them. To the weight of his name. Colvane. A family that built Ironforge's foundation. A family that did not break laws. A family that did not smuggle. His teeth clenched. Damn it. Bell. The first warden turned fully toward him now. His expression had changed. The respect was still there, but it was buried beneath duty. Brannick Colvane, he said, voice steady. By protocol, bringing an unregistered individual into the capital constitutes a violation of Ironforge entry law. A pause. Measured. Controlled. Given your family's standing, this matter will be handled through proper channels. Not punishment. Not yet. But not ignored. Brannick swallowed. Hard. Understood. But it didn't feel like understanding. It felt like being trapped. The warden gave a short nod, then gestured. This individual will be detained for identification, processing, and verification. Bell didn't speak. Didn't resist. But as he was led away, the pressure in the air pressed down on him once more. And this time, he knew. Something was very wrong with this city. And whatever it wasn't just affecting him. It was controlling everything. Bell was led away beneath the city of iron. The deeper they went into the gatehouse complex, the worse the air became. At first, it was only heat dry and pressing, the kind that clung to the skin and settled into clothing until it felt like even breath had weight. Then came the smell. Oil, soot, hot metal, burned coal, steam thick with mineral tang. Beneath it all lay something sharper and more unpleasant, something like old rust mixed with stagnant water, trapped inside walls that had not known wind or living soil in a very long time. Bell's steps faltered. The two iron wardens escorting him noticed immediately, each one tightening their hold just enough to keep him upright without dragging him outright. Chains of dark iron circled his wrists and connected to a ring at his waist, with another length fixed to shackles around his ankles. They were not especially heavy by themselves, but in Bell's current condition, they felt oppressive. The metal was wrong against his skin. Too cold in some places, too warm in others, as though it remembered the furnaces it had come from. Every corridor they passed through was lined with iron plates bolted over stone. The walls did not merely contain the structure, they armored it. Rivets the size of fingertips ran in orderly rows across overlapping metal sheets. Pipes threaded along the ceilings and dipped down the corners like veins carrying heat through the building. Every few yards, valves released hissing bursts of steam that briefly fogged the air before vanishing. The floors were made of fitted blackstone polished by years of boots and machinery, but even those were bordered in iron, caged by iron, dominated by iron. Bell tried not to show how much it unsettled him, but the city pressed against his senses in ways he could not ignore. Mana, which ought to have flowed around him like breath through leaves, felt strangled here. The currents were thin and twisted, as if they had been forced through grates and pipes and engines until they no longer moved naturally. His own power responded badly to it. It recoiled, surged, then weakened, leaving his limbs colder and his stomach tighter with each passing minute. By the time they brought him into the interrogation room, his face had gone visibly pale. The room itself was square, severe, and unwelcoming. Iron plates covered every wall from floor to ceiling, their surfaces scratched in places by years of use. A single vent near the upper corner exhaled warm air with a low rattling hum. The table at the center of the room was iron. The chair Bell was put into was iron. Even the ring bolted into the floor to secure the chain between his ankles had been forged, as if someone here considered wood, cloth, or comfort to be unacceptable weaknesses. When Bell sat, the metal bit cold through his clothes. Across from him, the iron warden from earlier took his seat. Broad-shouldered, square-jawed, and stern in the way of someone who had long ago decided softness was a luxury for other people, he removed one gauntlet finger by finger and set it on the table with a dull clink. His armor creaked as he sat. The insignia on his breastplate caught the light from a nearby wall lamp, an emblem of iron, authority, and order. "My name is Warden Brom," he said. His voice was controlled and flat, neither cruel nor kind. Bell looked at him and gave a slight nod. Brom pulled a stack of metal plates closer, thin, rectangular sheets bound on one side by an iron loop. Some bore etched writing in neat lines. Others were blank, waiting. Beside them rested a stylus unlike any Bell had seen before. Its shaft was black and ridged for grip, its tip fitted with a narrow chamber that glowed faintly from within, as though a coal ember had been trapped inside metal. Brom folded his hands. State your name. Bel Cranel. Full legal origin? Bel hesitated. Brom noticed. If you have one. I was raised in Elyndor's Heartgrove. The warden's brow shifted almost imperceptibly, though his expression remained guarded. Not a city. Not a province. Not a recognized settlement of the empire. Give me the nearest lawful point of origin. Bel swallowed against the dryness in his throat. I don't know. Brom stared at him for a moment, then nodded once and moved on. Divine patron. Demeter. That earned another pause. This one longer. The Greek goddess of harvest and wild growth. Yes. Brom reached for the stylus. He pressed his thumb against a small trigger set into its side. The tip brightened, and with a faint hiss a bead of molten orange gathered there. He lowered it to the metal plate and began to write. Bel watched despite himself. The tool did not scratch. It burned. Thin lines of glowing magma traced each word across the dark plate with astonishing precision, sinking just enough into the metal to leave marks behind. A second later the lines cooled from orange to dull red to blackened silver, fixed in place as though part of the plate itself. No ink, no quill, no parchment. The writing became permanent almost instantly. Bel blinked. It was ingenious. Even now, feeling half ill and trapped in iron, he could still recognize the craft in it. The dwarves had made writing into a form of forging. Brom continued. Purpose of entry into iron-forged territory. Bel took a breath. It came shallower than he intended. I needed to come here. That is not a purpose. It is a decision. Bel steadied himself against the chair. The forest is sick. Brom's stylus paused above the plate. Bel continued before the warden could interrupt. Elyndor's Heartgrove. I take care of it. Protect it. Recently, something has been changing. Blight. Disturbance. Harm to the land. He drew another breath, fighting a wave of nausea that rolled up through him without warning. I've been trying to understand why. And you believe the cause is here. Bel nodded once. Brom wrote again, the stylus hissing softly with each line. On what grounds? Bel looked down for a moment. His hands trembled faintly where the chains pinned them close. I can feel it. That finally earned him a visible reaction. Not shock. Not belief. Skepticism sharpened into something almost like concern. You can feel the empire harming your forest. Bel closed his eyes briefly as the room lurched in a small, sickening wave. Yes. Through druidic practice. Yes. Brom leaned back slightly in his chair. Explain, Druid. Bel opened his eyes again, though focusing on the metal room hurt more now than before. I keep balance with living things. Plants. Earth. Water. Growth. The old ways of the land. Brom's expression remained unreadable. And your motive in entering the capital city of Cragaroth? To find the source. Bel's voice was quieter now, but still steady. Or part of it. Something is wrong here. The warden studied him in silence for several moments, then resumed writing. Bel watched the glowing stylus move. He noticed details now that he hadn't at first. A fine channel along its side fed the molten bead at the tip from a hidden chamber inside the handle. The metal plates themselves were treated, likely alloyed to take the writing without warping. At the end of each completed entry, Brom pressed a smaller tool against the corner of the plate, a seal face etched with some official sigil. It left behind a faintly darker mark that shimmered once in the light before settling flat. A seal. Not wax. Not ink. Metal recognizing authority. Nothing about this place used the soft tools of the outside world if it could help it. Brom asked more questions. How long had Bel been inside the Empire? Who had helped him cross the border? Did he have known associates? What training did he possess? Had he been sent as an agent by another state? Bel answered each as plainly as he could. Not because he trusted the man across from him, but because he lacked the strength for deception and saw no point in attempting it. He had crossed into their territory without the required documents. That much was true. He had come to investigate a sickness tied, somehow, to this nation and this city. That too was true. The more he spoke, however, the more effort it seemed to take. The iron all around him felt oppressive now. Not just physically, spiritually. His skin had grown clammy. His breathing uneven. The flow of mana in the room was like trying to breathe through smoke thin, wrong, contaminated by machinery and heat. Twice he had to stop himself from leaning forward and retching. Brom noticed. The warden's eyes narrowed slightly as Bel answered the last question. No, Bel said weakly. I wasn't sent by anyone. Brom set the stylus down. For the first time since the questioning began, his tone changed. Not softer. More clinical. You look like you are about to collapse. Bel managed a faint, humorless smile. I feel worse than that. Brom considered him for a moment, then gathered the bound plates into a neat stack. He slipped the stylus into a slot at his belt and rose from his chair. The scrape of iron legs against iron floor made Bell flinch. Brom went to the door and struck it twice with his gauntlet. The latch opened at once. 2 iron wardens entered. Escort the detainee to a holding cell, Brom said. Mark him for temporary containment pending further review. The wardens saluted and moved to Bell's side. Bell tried to stand on his own. His legs nearly gave out. One of the wardens caught his arm before he could fall hard enough to strike the floor. The other unhooked the chain from the chair with efficient hands. Together they kept him upright and guided him into the corridor again. The walk to the holding cells passed in a haze of heat and dim iron light. Bell remembered doors with barred slits. He remembered the clang of mechanisms unlocking and relocking behind him. He remembered the smell changing slightly less oil here, more old stone and stale confinement. By the time they reached his cell, his vision had narrowed at the edges. The cell was small. Iron bars fronted a chamber of black stone and riveted plate. A narrow cot sat against one wall with a thin blanket folded atop it. There was a small water basin in one corner and a vent overhead that exhaled a steady ribbon of warm air. The floor was clean in the way places became clean after being scrubbed too often, though it still carried the smell of metal and age. The wardens removed the chain between Bell's ankles, but left the restraints on his wrists while they settled him on the cot. One of them even adjusted the blanket closer within his reach before they stepped out. The barred door shut. The lock turned. Bell lowered his head into his hands and tried, with limited success, not to be sick. Elsewhere in the gatehouse complex, Brom made his way to the main office of the Iron Wardens. Compared to the interrogation room, it was almost lively. It was still iron, of course, iron desks, iron cabinets, iron lamps mounted on articulated brackets, but this place held the clutter of actual work. Plates stacked in labeled trays. Seal presses mounted at station corners. Tool racks. Hooks for helms and cloaks. The air smelled of inkless heat writing, lamp oil, armor polish, and fresh steam from the pipes that ran along the walls. Somewhere deeper inside the office, someone was filing reports with rapid metallic clicks. At one desk near the far wall, another warden sat tipped back in his chair during what was clearly meant to be a break. His helm had been set aside. He was broader in the shoulders than Brom, but slouched enough to make the width seem less imposing. A half-finished mug sat near one hand, steam curling from whatever bitter drink he favored. His nameplate was clipped crookedly to his chest harness. Kargan. He glanced up as Brom entered. Well, Kargan said, how bad is your mysterious border criminal? Brom laid the stack of report plates onto his desk and began arranging them in order. He answered the questions. Kargan snorted. That's not what I asked. Brom finally looked at him. He claims he's a druid. That got an immediate reaction. Kargan burst out laughing. Not a polite chuckle. A full, open, disbelieving laugh that echoed off the iron walls. A druid, he repeated. What? Did you arrest a storyteller? Maybe next he'll say the trees sent him. Brom gave a slight nod, though his mouth did not quite follow Kargan's amusement. He said he tends Elyndor's Heartgrove. Claims he came because something is happening to the forest, and according to his findings the problem points to this city. Kargan laughed again, wiping one eye with the back of a knuckle. That's a new one. He lifted his mug, took a long swallow, and added, the boy we dragged in must be some new kind of crazy. Brom acknowledged the comment with a small incline of his head, but his gaze had already returned to the report plates. Maybe the human was delusional. Maybe he was sick from simple travel and a foreign environment and had built a story around the discomfort. Maybe. But procedure was procedure. And if there was even the smallest chance that something unusual lay beneath the nonsense, it was still his duty to report it upward. So Brom reached for the next blank plate, triggered the magma stylus, and began to write. Meanwhile, Brannick Colvane had never felt so out of place in his own country. The Iron Wardens escorting him did not bind his hands, nor did they treat him with the same rigid force they had used on Bell, but there was no mistaking the nature of the situation. He was not a guest. Not quite a prisoner either. Something in between. And that, somehow, felt worse. The structure they led him toward rose like a fortress of function rather than beauty. From the outside, it resembled a government hall if such a thing had been forged instead of built. Its walls were layered in dark iron plates reinforced with heavy bolts, their surfaces marked with soot stains and the faint streaks of oil that had long since seeped into the metal. Thick pipes ran along the exterior like exposed veins, carrying heat from deeper systems. Every few moments, vents released controlled bursts of steam that hissed sharply into the air before fading. Magma lamps were embedded at intervals along the walls, their caged cores glowing a deep orange red. The light they cast was harsh and uneven, more practical than welcoming. Above, metal catwalks connected sections of the building, where armored figures moved with purpose, never lingering, never idle. As Brannick stepped inside, the temperature rose immediately. The air was heavier here, thicker with heat and the scent of iron, oil, and something faintly mineral like stone freshly cracked open. The floor beneath his boots rang faintly with each step, not stone but reinforced metal plating layered over it. Every sound echoed differently in this place, sharper, more contained. They moved quickly, upward. Stairs of grated iron clanged beneath their weight as they ascended level after level. Along the way, dwarven soldiers passed them, some in full armor, others in partial gear, carrying tools or documents made of metal plates similar to those used by the wardens. Most spared Brannick only a brief glance. Recognition flickered in a few eyes. Colvane. Then it vanished. Duty over curiosity. Brannick felt it anyway. And with every step, the knot in his chest tightened. Embarrassment burned first. Then frustration. Then anger. At Bell. At himself. At the situation. Why didn't he go through proper channels? Why didn't I check? What was I thinking just picking up a stranger like that? His jaw clenched. He had wanted to help. That was all. But in Iron Forge, help without structure, without procedure, was a problem. And problems had consequences. His thoughts spiraled further. What would this do to his future? To his name? To his family? The Colvanes weren't just any family. They were foundational. Their work had shaped Iron Forge itself. If word spread that one of them had tried to bring an unregistered outsider into Cragaroth, his stomach twisted. They stopped. Before a set of doors. Massive. Iron, of course, but unlike the rest of the structure, these bore design. Etched patterns ran along the frame, angular and precise, with subtle inlays of darker metal that formed intricate lines like circuitry. The handles were thick and curved, polished from years of use. One of the wardens knocked once. The doors opened inward with a slow, heavy groan. Enter. Brannick was escorted inside. The doors closed behind him. And for the first time since entering the building, the atmosphere changed. The chamber was different. Still structured. Still controlled. But not entirely dwarven. The iron remained, of course it did, but it was no longer the dominant presence. Instead of bare plates and exposed rivets, the walls here were lined with layered panels of darker material, smoothed and shaped into cleaner surfaces. Subtle decorative trims ran along the edges, gold inlays, thin but deliberate, tracing patterns that felt more artistic than functional. The lighting was softer. Magma lamps still existed, but they were partially shielded behind glass casings, diffusing their glow into a warmer, steadier illumination. Mana pipes ran along the walls, but instead of being exposed, they were embedded beneath the surface, their faint blue and orange glows visible through thin, translucent channels. At the center of the chamber stood a desk. Iron, but refined. Its surface was polished to a dark sheen, edges beveled, corners reinforced not just for durability, but design. Stacks of metal plates lay upon it in careful arrangement, bound in rings and categorized in neat piles. Behind it stood a man. Human. His clothing immediately set him apart. Deep red robes draped over his frame, layered with gold thread and detailed with intricate embroidery. Pearls and silver ornaments lined the edges, catching the light in subtle glints. Small gemstones were set at key points, not ostentatious, but deliberate. Each piece spoke of status, of authority, of someone who belonged not to the forge floor, but above it. A priest engineer. He was writing. The iron stylus in his hand hissed softly as it traced molten lines across a plate. He did not look up. So, he said evenly, voice calm and measured. Mr. Colvane, is it? Brannick stiffened. I am friends with your father, Mr. Durgan Colvane. The stylus continued moving. The words landed heavier than expected. But that does not mean you are granted the privilege to allow anyone entry into Cragaroth as you see fit. The stylus stopped. The faint glow at its tip dimmed. Slowly, the man lifted his gaze and fixed it on Brannick. It was not anger. Not quite. But it was sharp. Assessing. Measuring. And just because you come from a prestigious and honored family, he continued, his tone hardening slightly, does not exempt you from breaking the law. Brannick swallowed. His throat felt dry. His knees. They weren't steady. This was the first time. The first time he had ever stood in a place like this. The first time he had been called out like this. The first time he had done something wrong enough to matter. And it was because of Bell. The priest engineer stood. He set the stylus down carefully on the desk, aligning it beside the plates before stepping out from behind it. His hands moved behind his back, posture straight, movements slow and controlled. He walked toward Brannick, each step deliberate. But, he said, voice shifting again less accusatory, more calculated, you will not be punished severely. Brannick blinked. Relief flickered, then stalled. And this, the man added, is because of your family. He stopped a short distance in front of Brannick, then leaned slightly against the desk behind him, placing both hands upon its surface. His gaze remained fixed. Ordinary men, he continued, would be punished without hesitation. Labor, mines, reassignment to fields where their mistakes can be corrected through effort. A faint smile formed. Not warm, not kind, but you. His eyes sharpened. You have talent. Brannick's breath hitched. Talent, the priest engineer repeated, that is far more valuable to the Empire in other capacities. The smile deepened slightly. There was something behind it now. Something deliberate. Something dangerous. You will not be wasted. Brannick's mind raced. What does that mean? What kind of work? What kind of project? His thoughts spiraled, images forming none of them good. Forced assignments. Dangerous experiments. Projects beyond his control. His heart pounded harder. A low tremor passed through the room. The priest engineer frowned slightly. Strange. Brannick barely noticed. His focus had narrowed entirely inward, fear coiling tighter with each passing second. Another tremor. Stronger. The glass panels along the left wall rattled. The priest engineer turned his head toward them. Just as it happened, the windows exploded. Glass shattered inward in a violent spray, shards scattering across the floor in glittering arcs. The sound was deafening sharp, violent, immediate. Then came the shockwave. A surge of raw mana erupted from the direction of the gates. It hit like an invisible hammer. The entire chamber shook. Metal groaned. The air warped. The priest engineer was thrown forward, instinctively dropping to one knee and raising his arms to shield his face from the blast and flying debris. Brannick was thrown. The force slammed into him, lifting him off his feet and sending him crashing across the room. He hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the breath from his lungs as he slid against the polished floor, coming to a stop near the far wall. His ears rang, a high, piercing tone drowning out everything else. Then, the alarms. Loud, relentless. Bells tolled throughout the structure, their deep, metallic clang echoing through the corridors, through the walls, through the very bones of the building. Outside, chaos. Inside, movement. Boots. Voices. Orders. The priest engineer lowered his arms slowly, eyes narrowing as he rose from his position. Something had happened. At the gates. And whatever it wasn't small.
Like and subscribe for more DanMachi fanfiction.
Chapter 4. The Breath Returns. For as long as Belle could remember, the world had always been alive. Not in the simple way others described, where creatures moved and rivers flowed, but in something deeper and constant, a quiet presence that existed beneath everything. Elyndor's Heartgrove had never been just a forest. It was a living being, and Belle had grown within it as one grows within a home that breathes alongside you. He remembered the warmth of the soil beneath his bare feet as a child, how it softened when he stepped gently and steadied when he stumbled. He remembered the trees leaning ever so slightly as he passed, their leaves whispering in a language that could only be understood through patience. And above all, he remembered her, Lady Demeter. Her voice had always been gentle without ever being weak, like sunlight breaking through after rain or roots anchoring deep beneath unseen soil. The forest does not serve you, Belle, she had once said, her hand resting lightly on his head beneath the vast canopy. You serve with it. She had taught him that the forest was never isolated, that it was connected to rivers, to mountains, to winds that traveled across entire continents. A single grove, if tended properly, could influence lands far beyond sight. Care for the roots, she would say, and the world will remember you kindly. And when she deemed him worthy, she gave him her blessing. The fauna of growth, the bond of nature, the right to listen and to be heard. From that day on, Belle was no longer just a boy. He was the caretaker of Elyndor's Heartgrove. Now he lay broken on iron. The floor beneath him was cold, not the living coolness of shaded earth or river stone, but something lifeless and unyielding. It did not respond, did not breathe, did not acknowledge his presence. The iron pressed against his skin with a sterile indifference, as if rejecting him entirely. Everywhere he looked, there was more of it. Walls plated in thick metal, bars forged without imperfection. A ceiling reinforced with rivets and seams that hummed faintly with distant machinery. Even the vibrations beneath him were wrong, rhythmic and mechanical, like a heartbeat that did not belong to anything alive. Bel's fingers curled weakly against the floor, searching for something familiar. Nothing answered. No whisper. No pulse. No life. His breathing came shallow and uneven as a wave of nausea rolled through him again. This is wrong. The words barely formed, his voice thin against the suffocating stillness of the cell. It wasn't just the iron. Since the moment he had crossed into Cragaroth's domain, something had shifted. The land itself felt sick, not destroyed but suppressed, as if something vast had been forced over it, smothering the natural flow of mana until it twisted into something stagnant and unnatural. This should not have been possible. This was a volcano, a place of immense natural power. Even buried beneath layers of metal and stone, the earth should still speak, the fire should still answer, the wind should still move. But when Bel reached for it, there was nothing. Or worse, there was resistance. His mana stirred within him, but instead of flowing, it churned violently, turning inward like a storm trapped beneath his skin. He winced, clutching his chest as another wave of sickness overtook him. This shouldn't. His body trembled. Even when he had stood against titans at the edge of the Heartgrove, even when he had pushed his limits until his body screamed, he had never felt this kind of weakness. In the forest, his mana had been endless, a natural extension of the world around him. Here, it felt like poison. His thoughts drifted despite himself, drawn back to the Heartgrove, to the roots, to the ancient tree that stood at its center. What had happened while he was gone? Had the blight spread further? Had the land begun to die? He had left to find answers, yet now he could not even stand. A weak, humorless breath escaped him. Lady Demeter. The name left his lips like a prayer. I'm sorry. The words cut deeper than the sickness. He had been given power, given purpose, and here he was, collapsed and helpless, unable to even touch the land he had sworn to protect. A faint heat pressed down from above, distant but unmistakable, the presence of the volcano bleeding through layers of iron and stone. It was so close, and yet it might as well have been beyond reach. He closed his eyes and tried again. He focused past the nausea, past the oppressive weight of the city, reaching deeper within himself. Mana stirred, weak at first, then stronger. A faint, unstable glow formed around him, flickering like a dying flame. The iron chamber trembled slightly as dust loosened from the seams above. Bel gritted his teeth and pushed harder, forcing his awareness downward into the earth, searching desperately for anything that would respond. A root, a vein of magma, a trace of life, anything. But nothing came. The glow faltered and collapsed, the energy snapping inward as if crushed by an unseen force. Bel gasped as the last of his strength drained away, leaving him colder than before. His body went limp, mana exhausted, breath shallow. Silence returned. A shadow passed beyond the barred window of the cell door, and a single eye peered through. A dwarf. One of the Iron Wardens. He watched Bel for a moment before speaking. Don't bother. His tone was blunt, matter of fact. Even if you're the strongest mage in the city, it won't work. Bel turned his head slightly, forcing the movement through sheer will. Why? The warden leaned closer. There's a barrier. A city-wide system. It disrupts mana flow, breaks casting patterns, keeps magic in check. Bel's eyes widened faintly. A barrier. The warden nodded once. Mana tech still works. Tools, engines, constructs they rebuilt differently. But raw casting. He shook his head. Dead. He straightened. So stop wasting your strength. Then he was gone, his footsteps fading into the iron corridors beyond. Bel stared at the ceiling, the words settling heavily in his mind. A barrier. A machine. Something powerful enough to suppress the natural flow of mana itself. That's why. That was why the land felt wrong. Why the forest had cried out. Why everything felt suffocated. His eyes closed again, not from effort this time, but from exhaustion. I have to. The words faded as darkness took him, something deeper than sleep pulling him under. Meanwhile, in the administrative chamber, Brum had long since stopped expecting order to remain orderly inside the main office chamber. That was the nature of the work. Iron plate documents arrived in stacks. Left in stacks, were sorted into smaller stacks, then reorganized into entirely different stacks depending on priority, rank, district, offense, deployment, clearance, and whether someone farther up the chain had suddenly decided a routine matter was now urgent. On good days, the system resembled discipline. On bad ones, it resembled controlled collapse. Today was drifting steadily toward the second. The office chamber was warm in the way all rooms within the gatehouse complex were warm. But this room held a different kind of heat, not the punishing pressure of furnace halls or the suffocating closeness of lower maintenance tunnels, but a bureaucratic heat. Dry, lingering. The kind that came from enclosed iron walls, overworked magma lamps, and two mini-mana pipes running behind reinforced panels without enough ventilation to let the place breathe. Rows of shelves lined the walls, each fitted with slots for bound plate ledgers and indexed report sheets. Some sections were neat, every plate aligned by size and seal color. Others had begun to sag under the weight of recent reports, the metal edges jutting unevenly like stacked blades. Thick rivets marched across the iron paneling in clean rows, and a set of exposed pipes ran along the upper corners of the ceiling, humming faintly with the slow transfer of heated vapor. Every now and then a valve clicked somewhere behind the wall, followed by a low hiss that briefly softened the room's stillness before fading again. At the center stood Brahm's desk, an unforgiving slab of dark iron reinforced at the corners and bolted into the floor so it could not be shifted even accidentally. It was currently buried beneath work. Numerous stacks of plates had been compiled there, and despite Brahm's efforts they had crossed the thin boundary between organized and simply not yet lost. Some were marked and sealed. Others remained blank along one edge, waiting for final authorization. A few had been partially sorted into categories, only to be interrupted halfway through by new arrivals. The rightmost pile leaned slightly, threatening to spill if one more report was carelessly laid upon it. Brahm exhaled heavily through his nose and rubbed one temple. Kargan had already returned to his shift at the gate entrance, leaving the chamber quieter than before. Too quiet, perhaps. Kargan's laughter, irritating as it could be, at least broke the monotony. Without it, only the scrape of metal plates, the hiss of warming stylus tips, and the distant pulse of city machinery remained. Brahm reached for another report plate, adjusted the small stack in front of him, and continued organizing. Temporary containment. Civilian detainment. Outer gate inspection discrepancies. Minor trade violations. Transit clearance reviews. He moved through them with efficient hands, flipping, sorting, sealing, and marking. Every now and then his eyes flicked toward the plate record regarding Cranel the Druid, as the young man had called himself. The words still sat strangely in his mind. Druid. Heartgrove. Sickness in the forest. Problem pointing toward Cragaroth. Absurd on its face, yet not absurd enough to dismiss entirely. Brahm disliked unresolved things. He was considering whether to reclassify Bell's file from a regular civilian detention to possible external intelligence concern when the chamber door burst open with such force that the iron latch struck the wall and rebounded with a sharp clang. Brahm's head snapped up at once. He rose halfway from his chair, irritation already forming. "Do not run into the office chamber like that," he began sharply. "You'll disrupt the workflow, unsettle the sorted plates, and create." The rest of the reprimand died before it fully left his mouth. Because the man standing in the doorway was not some careless runner, nor an overexcited junior warden, nor a messenger too frightened by urgency to remember discipline. Brahm knew him immediately. His spine straightened on instinct. His chair scraped back as he stood fully and brought his right fist to his chest in salute. The air in the room changed. Cash and Rook had entered the chamber. There were names in Ironforge spoken with respect, others with fear. A rare few with something heavier, something closer to awe. Cash and Rook belonged to the last of them. He crossed the threshold with the composure of a man who never needed to rush because the room would bend around his purpose regardless. He wore official Ironforge attire, though refined into something far more severe than anything an ordinary warden or officer would be permitted. A black coat fell around him in sharp, tailored lines. It seemed sewn with iron thread that caught the lamplight only at certain angles. Beneath it lay chainmail dark as smoke, mostly hidden beneath a fitted black business-like tuxedo coat that somehow managed to look both noble and lethal. His shoulder cuffs were silver, polished enough to reflect firelight in narrow, clean glints. Matching silver gauntlets covered his hands, each engraved with runic symbols of fire that pulsed faintly when the light touched them just right. Iron greaves reinforced his lower legs, their edges as precise as forged blades. Beneath the coat, just visible when he moved, rested the shaped grip of a mana flintlock holstered close to his ribs. Everything else about him was black. Not decorative black. Operational black. A color chosen to drink light rather than return it. Behind him stood two more figures in similar attire, other members of the Iron Judges. They did not speak. They did not need to. Their silence carried the same weight as drawn steel. The Iron Judges. Executors of the Lord's Shadow. Not soldiers in the ordinary sense, nor merely investigators, nor merely assassins, though they could serve as all three when required. They were deployed when danger crossed the threshold from concerning to unacceptable. Their presence in this office chamber meant something had shifted beyond the visible order of the city. Cashin's gaze settled on Brahm with calm precision. "I am Cashin Rook of the Iron Judges," he said, though the introduction was almost unnecessary. His voice was measured and professional, each word placed exactly where he wanted it. From within his coat, he produced a badge and held it briefly toward the light. It resembled a silver pocket watch at first glance, but its face bore no time. Instead, engraved into its polished cover was the symbol of the Iron Judges, a hammer crossed with a sword, a crown beneath them, the lines so fine they seemed cut by heat rather than by hand. "I need the information regarding the druid you have in custody." No flourish. No threat. Just direct purpose. Brahm swallowed once and nodded immediately. "Yes, sir." His fingers moved faster now, gathering the relevant plates from among the stacks. He compiled the interview record, temporary containment classification, identity discrepancies, and observational notes into a single bound set, aligning their edges against the desk before extending them respectfully across the iron surface. Cashin stepped forward to take them, and the building shuddered. It began not as noise, but as movement. A deep, wrong tremor traveled up through the floor beneath Brahm's boots, subtle for half a second, then unmistakable. The desk rattled. The stacked plates upon it jumped and clinked against one another. A magma lamp fixed along the wall flickered violently, causing shadows to jerk across the chamber. Then came the sound. An explosion, distant but massive enough that the room itself seemed to flinch. It struck not only the ears but the chest, a blunt wave that rolled through the iron walls and rattled the pipes. Somewhere down the corridor outside, something crashed hard enough to ring like a struck anvil. The shelves along the left wall shook, and a dozen properly organized plate documents spilled into disarray, scattering across the floor in metallic clatters. Brahm stumbled a fraction, one hand still outstretched with the report plates. Cashin moved first, not with panic, with speed. His posture changed in an instant, all trace of conversational stillness replaced by field readiness. One of the silent iron judges behind him already had a hand inside his coat. The other turned toward the hall before the second echo of the blast had even faded. Cashin snatched the plate records from Brahm's hand in one clean motion. "Stay here," he ordered, though it sounded less like concern and more like command. Then he and the other two iron judges sprinted from the chamber. Their coats snapped behind them as they moved, boots striking the floor with sharp, controlled impacts. The open door framed them for only a heartbeat before they were gone into the corridor beyond, swallowed by alarm and motion. Brahm remained standing beside his desk, arm half lowered, his pulse hammering in his throat. For a second, all he could do was stare at the doorway. He had always admired the iron judges. As a child, admiration had been too small a word for it. They had been legends made real silent figures in black iron, threading through stories told in barracks, workshops, and gatehouses alike. As he grew older, the admiration had hardened into something more disciplined, but it had never vanished. They were the best of the best. The edge kept hidden until the nation needed cutting done. He remembered one of the stories clearly, because it had been repeated often enough to become near doctrine among younger wardens. 6 iron judges, 1 border outpost, an entire battalion of Stormcrown mages. And when the smoke cleared, the border still held. Perhaps the details changed each time it was told. Perhaps the numbers grew larger in the mouths of those who worshipped competence from afar. But the fact remained, when ordinary force failed, the iron judges did not. That such men had just run through his office. That Cashin Rook himself had taken the Druid's file. That an explosion powerful enough to shake the administrative wing had just struck somewhere inside or beneath the city. It all settled together into one realization. Something was deeply, catastrophically wrong. A second tremor rolled through the chamber, weaker than the first, but enough to send one of the half-toppled stacks sliding fully off the corner of the desk. Plates struck the floor and scattered around Brahm's boots in ringing cascades. At last his body remembered itself. He inhaled sharply, bent, and snatched up his helm from the corner of the desk. His gaze flicked once to the ruined order of his office documents scattered, sorted reports mixed, priorities undone. Then toward the open door. Duty tugged in 2 directions. The office needed securing. The chain of command would need records. But the iron judges did not run unless the city itself was in danger. Brahm tightened his grip on the edge of the desk, jaw hardening. Then somewhere beyond the walls, The alarm bells began to toll. Back inside the jail cell, Bell lay on his back and stared at the ceiling as if it might answer him. It didn't. The warden's words lingered anyway, circling his thoughts like something that refused to leave. A barrier. A machine. Something powerful enough to choke the natural flow of mana itself. The idea pressed against him harder than the iron beneath his body. His eyelids trembled, then fell shut not out of rest, but because he no longer had the strength to keep them open. The world narrowed into weight and heat and silence. The floor was wrong. Everything about it was wrong. It wasn't the cool, living touch of soil or stone that held memory and breath beneath the surface. This was something else, dead, rigid, unyielding. The iron bit into his back, cold where it touched exposed skin, yet carrying a faint, oppressive warmth from deep below, as if the volcano itself was trying to speak through layers of suffocation and failing. It didn't respond to him. It didn't recognize him. It didn't care. Time stretched thin and warped around him. There was no rhythm here, no wind, no birds, no rustling leaves to mark the passage of moments. Only the distant, mechanical pulse of the city, low vibrations traveling through the iron like the heartbeat of something artificial and endless. Seconds might have passed, or minutes, or something longer. Bell couldn't tell anymore. Then, something shifted. At first, it was so faint he thought it was a hallucination born from exhaustion. A tremor in the air, a disturbance so slight it barely existed. But it was there. A ripple. Soft. Fragile. Like the first breath after drowning. The crushing pressure that had wrapped itself around his senses loosened not much, not enough to free him, but just enough to be noticed. Bell's eyes snapped open. Mana. He felt it before he could think. It didn't creep back. It didn't trickle. It surged. Through the walls. Through the floor. Through him. It hit all at once, warm, alive, overwhelming. It flooded into his body like a dam had shattered somewhere deep beneath the world, like something ancient and furious had finally broken free. Bell gasped. The sound tore out of his chest as his body jolted upright, muscles locking, trembling violently as energy rushed through veins that had been starved and suffocated moments before. The sickness. Gone. Not fading. Not easing. Gone. Erased so completely it felt like a lie his body had once believed. It's back. The words scraped out of his throat, rough and disbelieving. His hands shook. Not from weakness. From power. It filled him too fast, too much, too violently. His senses snapped open all at once. He could feel the world again, not clearly, not cleanly, but enough. Enough to know something had changed. Instinct took over before reason could catch up. He raised his hand. Reached. For the earth. For the forest. For the quiet, patient life that had always answered him. He searched for roots. For vines. For anything that would remind him of home. Come on. The whisper barely formed. The mana moved. It obeyed. But the world did not. From a thin crack in the iron-plated floor, something answered. A few pale tendrils forced themselves upward, thin and fragile, twisting as if struggling against something unseen. They pushed through the seam, reaching toward him in weak, desperate motions. And then they died. They blackened almost instantly, shriveling as if burned from within. The life drained out of them before they had even fully emerged, collapsing back into the crack as brittle, lifeless strands. Bell stared. His jaw tightened. His fingers curled slowly into a fist. Still, resisting. Even now. Even with the mana flowing again. This place rejected him. Rejected life. Rejected everything he was. Bell inhaled sharply, forcing air into lungs that suddenly felt too small to contain what was building inside him. Then he reached deeper. Not for green. Not for life. For something older. Something buried. Something that did not grow. But burned. Heat. Stone. Pressure. The sleeping fire beneath the mountain. He reached for it. And this time, the world answered. Violently. A pulse exploded in his chest. Not warmth. Not comfort. Power. Raw, surging, uncontrollable. It spread outward through his body in a rush that made his vision blur. His skin flushed hot, as if something inside him had ignited. The air around him shimmered faintly. The floor beneath his feet responded. At first, it was subtle. Then it wasn't. Thin lines of orange light flickered beneath the iron plating, like veins tearing open beneath flesh. They spread outward in jagged patterns, glowing brighter with each passing second. The metal creaked. Warped. The heat rose fast enough to sting. Somewhere far below, something vast stirred. The volcano answered. Not gently. Not patiently. Not like the forest. This was different. Hungry. Violent. alive in a way that felt dangerous. Magma surged beneath layers of rock and iron, pressing upward against his will as if eager no, desperate to be released. Bell's breath hitched. His body tensed. This wasn't like before. This wasn't balance. This wasn't harmony. This was force. Unfiltered. Unforgiving. It didn't sway or bend like vines in the wind. It churned. It burned. It wanted to break. To tear through the iron. To split the earth open. To devour. For a single, terrifying moment, Bell understood exactly what he was holding. Not control. Not power. A beast. And he had his hand around its throat. The realization sent a shiver through him, not of fear alone, but something sharper. Something that made his pulse quicken. Because part of him, a small, dangerous part, wanted to let it go. Wanted to see what would happen if he stopped holding it back. Bell clenched his teeth. Held it. Forced it down. But the heat didn't leave. It lingered beneath his skin, coiled and waiting, a second heartbeat pounding in time with his own. Different. This power was different. And whatever had just broken in this city had changed more than just the barrier. A thunderous crash shook the corridor outside, followed immediately by shouts, the clash of metal, and the sharp, cracking discharge of mana weapons. The sound of boots hammered across iron steps. Something screamed. A blast of cold wind surged under the barred door, carrying with it the bitter scent of frost, scorched steel, and ruptured mana. Bell turned toward the door, just as it burst open hard enough to strike the wall. Two iron wardens stood there, both breathing heavily, faces drawn tight beneath their helms. One had a streak of soot across his cheek and a split in his shoulder plate, where something sharp had struck and skidded off. The other kept his mana flintlock raised toward the corridor, his eyes darting from shadow to shadow. One of them jabbed a finger toward Bell. If you want to live, come with us. Before Bell could answer, a shrieking gust of wind tore down the hallway outside the cell. It carried shards of ice with it, long jagged splinters that slammed into the stone frame around the open door and burst apart in sprays of frost. The impact rang through the passage like shattered glass. The nearer warden swore under his breath, seized Bell by the forearm, and hauled him toward the corridor. Come on, mage, he snapped. We need every hand. Bell nodded once and stepped forward, magma still simmering beneath his skin like a second pulse. The prison level had already descended into chaos. The corridor beyond the cell block was filled with smoke, steam, and fractured light. Mana lamps along the walls flickered wildly, their caged flames sputtering between orange and blue as if the entire system that fed them had been struck. Iron bars had been torn loose from several cells. A section of reinforced wall farther down the hall had been ripped apart entirely, its heavy plates peeled outward like broken ribs. Wind howled through the breach from the staircase beyond, carrying with it powdery frost that clung to the walls and turned the iron slick with rime. The two wardens led the way, boots striking sparks from the grated steps as they climbed. Bell followed close behind, one hand brushing the wall to steady himself as another blast of magic shook the structure. The iron staircase spiraled upward through the administrative building like the inside of a giant metal spine. Steam hissed from ruptured pipes above, raining hot droplets onto the steps. Somewhere overhead, bells were beginning to toll in heavy, staggered rhythms, their metallic peals rolling through the building like warnings hammered into the bones of the city. As they reached the next landing, Bell saw the battle clearly for the first time. A larger hallway stretched ahead, broad enough for official traffic and lined on both sides with iron-framed doors, magma lamps, and inset mana conduits that now flickered erratically beneath cracked glass covers. The air in the corridor was a war of extremes. One side burned with furnace heat from ruptured pipes, while the other was veiled in white frost where enemy magic had coated the iron walls in glittering ice. Every breath tasted of ash, metal, and something sharp and electric that stung the back of the throat. The attackers were waiting farther up the hall. They were not monsters. They were men and women, elves and humans, robed or lightly armored in dark travel gear reinforced with steel plates and compact battery packs strapped to their backs. Their eyes were hard with purpose. Wind twisted around their hands like living blades. Spears of ice formed and launched with terrifying speed, shrieking across the corridor toward the defenders. Pinned behind a line of overturned desks and cracked support pillars, several iron wardens returned fire with mana flintlocks. Their shots flashed red-orange through the haze, but the attackers moved with practiced discipline, splitting apart and reforming under the cover of conjured gusts and frozen barriers. Ahead of the wardens stood two iron golems, slow but relentless. Their huge bodies blocked much of the corridor as they advanced, each step booming through the floor. Wind slashes struck their plating and burst into sparks. Icicle spikes cracked against their arms and chests, leaving white scars of frost that melted almost as quickly as they formed. The golems continued forward with dull, implacable force, raising their heavy arms to shield the dwarves crouched behind them. Bel had never seen battle like this inside such a confined place. In the Heartgrove, combat had been movement among roots, branches, and living terrain. Here everything was iron angles, echoing walls, ricocheting spells, and trapped heat. The sound was deafening boots hammering, metal shrieking, steam venting, mana discharging, wardens shouting over the din. Then the center of the corridor erupted. 3 figures in black dropped into the middle of the assailants from above, descending with the controlled precision of trained killers. Their long coats snapped around them as they landed in low, balanced stances, the tails of those coats brushing the frost-covered floor. Bel caught flashes of silver gauntlets, polished greaves, and the severe lines of fitted black coats that resembled formal tuxedos remade for war. Red fire bloomed instantly in their palms. The attackers hesitated for one fatal breath. The 3 newcomers did not. One of them drove forward with brutal economy, his fists slamming into the chest of a storm-crowned mage. Flame burst from the silver gauntlet at the moment of impact, and the mage was launched backward in a spray of sparks and burning cloth. Another spun past a rising wall of ice and struck low, his kick taking an elf behind the knee before a second blow, wreathed in red fire, crashed into the side of her jaw. The third moved even faster than the others. A Stormcrown attacker encased both hands in jagged ice, shaping them into crude spiked gauntlets before lunging in close. The man in black met him without hesitation. He pivoted, rose, and brought down a sharp axe kick wrapped in concentrated flame. The blow struck the attacker at the head and drove him into the floor so hard the reinforced iron plating bent and cracked beneath him. The sound rang down the hallway like a hammer blow on an anvil. Bel stared, stunned. They were not fighting like wardens. There was no defensive line, no formation, no shield discipline. They fought like executioners. Precise, controlled, efficient. Each movement was stripped of everything unnecessary. One of the black-coated men turned slightly, and Bel caught the cold gleam of silver runes along his gauntlet, the edge of a holstered mana flintlock beneath his coat, and the rigid stillness of someone who seemed perfectly at home in chaos. The attackers broke under the sudden assault, some stumbling back toward the breached section of wall, others trying to reform around new spell circles. The 3 men did not give them the chance. They drove forward in a wave of black coats and red flame, cutting straight through the middle of the enemy formation and toward the gate entrance where the greater sounds of battle still thundered. Bel stood frozen for half a heartbeat longer, his mind struggling to catch up. Then one of the wardens beside him shoved his shoulder. Move. Bel did. He followed. Not blindly, but because instinct screamed that whatever was happening at the gates mattered more than his cell, more than his arrest, more than anything that had existed half an hour ago. Magma rolled beneath his skin in hot, unstable pulses as he ran up the corridor behind the wardens and the 3 black-coated fighters. Each step sent a faint shiver of heat through the floor. The farther he moved from the cell block, the more the city opened around him, not into freedom, but into a larger battlefield. The administrative wing ahead was already tearing itself apart. Doors hung broken from hinges. Office windows had shattered inward, spraying glass across iron desks and iron floors. Steam poured from ruptured pipes overhead, turning sections of the hall into shimmering white fog lit by flashing magma lamps. Somewhere nearby, a support column had partially collapsed, showering sparks as exposed conduits snapped and whipped against the wall. Bel could feel the city now, not as something natural, not as something healthy, but as something wounded. The volcano beneath Cragaroth throbbed like a chained heart. The stone answered him in rough, angry pulses. Fire pushed against iron. Heat pressed upward through layers of industry and machinery that had tried, for years, to force the mountain into obedience. And above all of it, mana moved wildly through the city in chaotic surges. The barrier was broken. Whatever came next would decide whether Cragaroth survived the wound or split apart around it. Bel tightened his fists and ran faster, following the wardens and the 3 black-coated men deeper into the heart of the unfolding catastrophe.
Like and subscribe for more DanMachi fanfiction.
Chapter 5, Turning the Tide. Cragaroth trembled, not from siege engines battering its walls, not from the steady rhythm of its own foundries or the familiar labor of gears, pistons, and heat. This trembling was different. It moved through the city like a shiver through a body long thought unshakable, traveling beneath iron streets, through reinforced foundations, along metal pipes and mana conduits buried deep within its frame. Mana had returned. It flooded the city with wild, uncontrollable force. It rushed through every iron plate, every mana line, every pressurized pipe that had once carried power in controlled channels. The carefully regulated systems of the dwarves, their manatech, their engines, their barriers, their constructs began to stutter beneath that sudden deluge. Lamps flickered from orange to blue to violent white. Exposed conduits spat sparks. Steam vents released in panicked bursts, shrieking through the chaos like wounded things. For generations, the city had tried to harness power, to cage it, to refine it into engines and weapons and innovation. But what surged through Cragaroth now was not refined. It was primal, older than the city, older than its laws, older than the first hammer lifted in ambition beneath the mountain. It was something the world had buried into stone and root and flame before the dwarves had ever built their first forge. And now, because something deep below had been broken, that ancient pulse had awakened. Even the volcano felt it. The mountain that Cragaroth had wrapped in iron and smoke stirred like some great beast waking from forced sleep. Deep below the city, magma shifted in channels long pressed into obedience. Heat swelled. Pressure moved. The old fire did not rage blindly, but it moved with the dangerous awareness of something that had finally remembered itself. Bell felt all of it. He sprinted beside the two iron wardens through a city that no longer felt dead. The corridors shook underfoot. Cracks glowed faintly in places where the heat beneath pressed closer to the surface. Mana lamps stuttered overhead, their caged lights casting wild flashes across smoke-filled halls. Steam hissed from ruptured pipes and billowed around them in white clouds, mixing with frost that still clung stubbornly to sections of wall where enemy magic had struck. The air was a battlefield all on its own. It smelled of hot metal, burning oil, frost-shattered stone, and the sharp electric bite of unleashed mana. Each breath tasted like ash and lightning. Each step echoed with urgency as Bell and the wardens climbed, turned, and pushed toward the gate entrance where the roar of battle only grew louder. Bell noticed the damage as they ran. Shattered windows, broken iron pillars, iron doors bent inward or torn from hinges altogether, desks and plate ledgers scattered across halls that had once been orderly. Even mighty Cragaroth, the spine of the empire, could bleed when struck by surprise. And then they emerged into the entrance district. The sight that met Bell's eyes stopped him for half a heartbeat. The gate plaza was no longer the marvel of iron and disciplined engineering he had first encountered. It had become a war zone between opposites. The massive gate structures still stood, but they were scarred and half swallowed by frost. The ground that had once been dark stone and soot-stained iron was now white and gleaming in patches, transformed into jagged fields of ice that spread like a frozen sea over the entrance. Glacial ridges had erupted across the plaza, their surfaces catching the sunlight in cold blue-white reflections. Thick rime clung to walls, golem carcasses, and broken battlements. Frost smoke curled low across the ground, turning the battlefield into something half-real and dreamlike. The two gate golems, those towering iron sentinels that had once stood motionless and immense beside the entrance, lay broken now. One had collapsed onto its side, its chest core shattered and dark. The other had lost one arm and part of its head, its massive body half buried beneath a ridge of conjured ice. Their silence was somehow more intimidating than their former stillness had been. And all across that ruined plaza, the battle raged. At the center of the iron-forged defense stood three human figures in black. Iron judges. Even Bell, who knew nothing of their ranks or titles, could tell immediately that they were different from the wardens. They moved like sharpened intent. Black coats reinforced with silver cuffs and gauntlets flashed through smoke and frost. Fire magic burst from their hands in disciplined strikes, not wild sprays, but focused impacts. Each conjured punch and shot of flame aimed to kill, scatter, or break formation. Their movements were precise, economical, almost brutal in their efficiency. Around them, a handful of iron wardens formed staggered lines behind fallen debris and fragments of ruined machinery, firing mana-powered flintlocks that spat glowing rounds into the chaos. Facing them were the Stormcrown mages. Now Bell saw them clearly. They wore robes and coats of blue and white, high-quality garments woven from durable material and reinforced with enchantments that made the fabric shimmer faintly when struck by light or spellfire. Long hems whipped in the cold wind around them. Silver thread traced runic patterns along sleeves, collars, and breast panels. Their eyes glowed whenever they called on magic, some pale blue, like moonlit ice, others violet white, like lightning buried beneath frost. Many of them floated a few feet above the frozen ground. Around each storm-crowned mage revolved massive formations of glacial ice, each one roughly the size of a boulder, yet unnaturally smooth, as though sculpted by an unseen hand rather than shaped by nature. The surfaces reflected fractured light in cold blue-white hues, their polished planes catching flashes of fire, sparks, and distant explosions. These floating masses did not drift aimlessly. They moved with purpose. Some rotated in slow, deliberate orbits around their casters, maintaining a steady defensive pattern. Others reacted sharply, snapping into position with sudden, violent precision whenever danger approached. When mana-infused bullets from iron-forged flintlocks screamed toward them, the ice responded instantly. The frozen shields shifted and intercepted, absorbing the impact with thunderous cracks that echoed across the plaza. Fractures spread across their surfaces like lightning before sealing over again under the influence of sustained magic. And when the Stormcrown mages chose to abandon defense, those same floating masses transformed into weapons of devastating force. With a flick of the caster's will, they launched forward, tearing through the air with a deep, resonant hum, crashing into iron barricades, shattered golem parts, and defensive lines with crushing impact. The battlefield had ceased to resemble anything orderly or controlled. This was no longer a structured engagement between disciplined forces. It was a collision of opposing dominions. Fire against frost. Industry against arcane mastery. Control against something far older. Bell stood at the edge of that chaos for less than a heartbeat. Then he moved. There was no plan, no careful calculation, no measured decision. The moment overtook him completely. Something deeper than thought, something buried beneath exhaustion and pain, surged forward and seized control. His hand lowered instinctively, fingers spreading slightly as if reaching for something unseen. He did not reach for the forest. Not for roots threading through living soil. Not for the quiet, patient pulse of green life that had always answered him with calm obedience. There was no forest here. No living earth to cradle him. Only iron. Only stone. Only the immense, sleeping weight beneath it all. So he reached deeper. Beyond the surface. Beyond the dead layers of worked metal and carved foundations. Into the mountain itself. Into the ancient fire sealed beneath Cragaroth. For a single suspended moment, there was resistance, something vast and heavy pressing back against his awareness, like a presence too large to fully comprehend. Then, it answered. Not gently. Not patiently. But completely. The ground did not merely tremble. It convulsed. A violent shockwave tore through the plaza, strong enough to throw several combatants off balance. The iron plating beneath their feet groaned as if under immense pressure, and the frozen battlefield fractured in jagged lines that burned with faint orange light from within. The cracks spread rapidly, racing outward in branching patterns like veins igniting beneath the surface. A low, thunderous rumble followed, deep enough to be felt more than heard. Alarms rang out across the district, their metallic cries mixing with shouts of alarm and confusion from both sides. The carefully conjured ice field, once smooth and dominating, began to rupture under the pressure. Sections of it split apart violently, shards lifting and tilting as heat surged upward from below. Then the eruption came. It did not begin as a single explosion. It began as multiple breaches points across the plaza where the world itself seemed to give way. From those fractures, pillars of fire and molten earth burst upward with explosive force. They tore through the ice in violent bursts of steam and shattered crystal, sending fragments scattering in every direction. The sound was deafening, a combination of hissing vapor, cracking ice, and the raw roar of rising magma. Heat slammed outward in waves. The air changed instantly. Where moments before it had been biting cold, it now burned against exposed skin. Frost evaporated in violent bursts, replaced by thick, swirling steam that reduced visibility and turned the battlefield into a shifting, half-blind haze of heat and moisture. Trails of magma surged across the plaza, glowing rivers cutting through the remnants of the frozen terrain. They moved with unsettling fluidity, splitting formations, swallowing shattered defenses, and consuming anything caught in their path. The battlefield stopped. Not entirely, but enough. Dwarves, humans, Stormcrown mages. All of them hesitated. All of them turned. For one suspended instant, No one looked at their enemies. They looked at the ground, at the mountain, at the impossible force rising from beneath their feet. It felt less like magic, and more like something awakening. Bel stood at the center of it, arms still outstretched, his entire body trembling under the sheer pressure of what he had drawn forth. The heat radiating from the ground surged through him, not burning, but overwhelming, filling his senses with something vast and untamed. This was not the forest. This did not listen. This did not yield. It answered, but only because it wanted to. A few paces away, one of the Iron Wardens struggled to his knees behind a shattered piece of golem plating. His armor was scorched along one side, his breathing ragged as he tried to steady himself. At first, his gaze was fixed on the spreading magma, wide with disbelief. Then it shifted. It found Bel, and it stayed there. The Warden's expression changed slowly as understanding crept in, not of the mechanism, not of the magic, but of the source. His mouth parted slightly. His grip on his weapon slackened. There was no admiration in his eyes, no relief, only a dawning, unfiltered horror. That's him, he whispered hoarsely, though no one was listening. The man who had just turned the battlefield inside out was not standing at the center of a spell circle. He was simply standing, and the world had answered him. Across the plaza, Cashin Rook had already turned. He had felt the shift before he fully saw it, the sudden collapse of the Stormcrown advantage, the violent surge of heat pushing back against the frozen domain. But when his eyes settled on Bel, he paused, just for a fraction of a second. His expression, usually controlled to the point of cold detachment, betrayed something rare. Surprise. Genuine. Unfiltered. Not at the destruction. Not at the scale. But at the nature of it. No chant. No incantation. No visible construct. The magic had not been cast. It had been taken. Commanded. For that brief moment, Cashin simply watched, his sharp mind recalculating everything he thought he understood about the battlefield. Then the moment passed. The surprise vanished as quickly as it had appeared, buried beneath discipline and control. His expression hardened once more, returning to the composed, precise demeanor expected of an iron judge. But the calculation in his eyes had changed. Bel was no longer just a variable. He was a factor, a decisive one. And as the steam thickened and the molten veins continued to carve through the shattered plaza, that realization settled into place with quiet certainty. This battle had shifted. Not because of strategy, not because of numbers, but because something older than both sides had just been unleashed. And it had chosen to answer Bel. Bel's outstretched hand trembled. He could feel the power coursing through him. It was nothing like the patient, responsive movement of vines. Nothing like calling roots from rich earth or bending forest growth into shape. This was harsher, hungrier. The fire beneath Cragaroth was vast, untamed, and eager to break things. Some of the Stormcrown mages managed to react in time, rising higher into the air on gusts of magic and abandoning their floating ice boulders below. Others were not so fortunate. Arms of molten earth surged upward from the broken ground, crude, massive, and blazing. They reached with terrible force and seized fleeing mages from the air or dragged them from collapsing ice platforms. The fiery limbs closed around them like something precious that could not be allowed to escape. Screams cut across the plaza, swallowed by steam and heat as the unlucky were pulled down into cracking magma channels. Bel's heart pounded at the sight. He had done that, not with deliberate cruelty, but with power that barely felt like his own. His control wavered for a heartbeat as the sheer magnitude of what he had called made chills run up his spine despite the heat. Above the battlefield, motion drew his attention. A skyship. It drifted above the gate district like a dark cloud, its elegant hull wrapped in runic plating and frost-wreathed magic. Mages lined its deck, their robes snapping in the violent winds they summoned. Ballista-like magical arrays along its sides glowed blue and violet, and a shimmering barrier enveloped the vessel in layered waves of translucent light. Cashin Rook and the other Iron Judges saw it too. They raised their silver gauntlet hands in near unison, and lances of fire streaked skyward. The attacks were fast, disciplined, and powerful enough to leave glowing afterimages in the air. But they struck the barrier and broke apart. Blue-violet ripples spread across the ship's magical shield, absorbing the impact with a sound like a bell struck underwater. The skyship held. Below, the broken ice field hissed and cracked as Bel's summoned heat spread further. Steam rolled upward in blinding clouds. The land beneath the gate was returning to itself, the thick sheets of magical frost losing their hold under the relentless pressure of awakened magma. Bell stared at his own hands. This magic frightened him. Not because it was evil, because it was harder to hold. The forest listened like an old friend. The volcano responded like a chained beast suddenly loosed. It was wilder, vast, unstable. Its every answer came with the sense that one wrong push might turn a battlefield into a grave. The mages aboard the ship began to chant. Their glowing eyes brightened. The air above the gate darkened with conjured cloud and swirling mana. Then the storm came. Thousands of ice shards formed overhead, long, narrow spears of frozen death hanging in the air like a suspended avalanche. For an instant, they glittered beautifully in the fractured sunlight. Then they fell. Cashin felt the danger before the first shard descended. Bell saw it in the Iron Judge's posture, how he shifted, how both silver gauntlets blazed as he drew on everything he had to shape a barrier of fire before the defenders. Flames surged upward in a wide arc, but even Bell could sense it would not be enough. Not against that many projectiles. Not across that much ground. Too many would die. Bell moved before the thought fully formed. He willed the land. And the land obeyed. Multiple hands of molten earth rose from the shattered gate plaza, larger than before, rough and unfinished, their surfaces glowing with internal fire. They bent over the defenders and layered shields, crossing and overlapping like fingers closing over fragile embers. The rain of ice struck. The impact was deafening. Frozen spears shattered against molten stone in bursts of steam and exploding frost. Some drove deep enough to hiss and melt halfway through. Others glanced off and spun into the ground, piercing iron plating, dead golems, and wounded men alike. The improvised barrier held, but not perfectly. One of the Iron Judges cried out as a spear punched through his leg. Several wardens were thrown back by ricocheting shards or pierced through shoulder and thigh. One dwarf collapsed beneath a glancing hit that shattered his arm guard and drove him into the frozen rubble. At last the rain ended. Steam flooded the gate district in thick rolling waves. Bell coughed once, trying to see through it. His eyes searched the sky. The ship. Where was the ship? There. Already withdrawing. The floating vessel was drifting back and upward, its barriers still intact, its surviving mages regrouping behind layers of wind and light. They had judged the cost and chosen retreat over annihilation. Bell wanted to call the mountain again, wanted to drag them down. But the moment he reached for that power, his body answered with agony. The flood of mana that had surged through him moments ago was gone. Not entirely, but enough. His veins felt hollowed out, scorched from the inside. Every limb ached. His breathing turned ragged. The strength went out of his knees so suddenly that he nearly stumbled forward into the steam. He had underestimated the cost. The volcano's power was not like the forest's endless support. To bend that magnitude of molten force, to force heat and stone into shape, had consumed far more mana than any spell he had used before. His vision blurred at the edges. The ground tilted. No, he was falling. Two dwarven iron wardens, the same ones who had dragged him from the cell block, broke from cover near the fallen gate golem and ran toward him. Catch him. Bell heard the shout as if from very far away. His consciousness was already slipping. Shapes moved through the steam. Black coats. Silver gauntlets. The Iron Judges were approaching too, quickly, urgently, and for a strange detached moment Bell wondered whether they looked more like rescuers or executioners. The thought dissolved before it finished. The plaza darkened. The roar of battle narrowed into a distant ringing hum. Then everything went black. Cashin Rook had seen power before. He had fought storm-crowned battle mages at the northern borders where entire valleys had been frozen over in a single night. He had watched shadow casters unravel entire formations of soldiers without ever stepping into sight. He had stood in the aftermath of battles where the air itself still burned with lingering magic hours after the last strike had been cast. But what he had witnessed at the gate, that was something else entirely. The plaza still smoldered. Steam rose in thick, rolling waves from the ground where molten earth had torn through the frozen battlefield. The once immaculate gate entrance of Cragaroth was now a fractured wasteland of cracked iron, shattered ice, and cooling magma veins that glowed faintly like dying embers beneath the surface. The air pulsed with heat and frost at once, one moment stifling, the next biting cold as residual storm-crowned magic clung stubbornly to the edges of the battlefield. Cashin stood at the center of it, unmoving for a brief moment as his sharp eyes scanned the aftermath. He flexed his right hand slightly. Even now, his gauntlet still radiated residual heat, but it was weaker than it should have been. Fire magic his specialty, his discipline, his weapon had struggled. not because of lack of skill, but because of the terrain. The Stormcrown mages had reshaped the battlefield with terrifying precision. They had turned the Gate District into a domain of ice, suppressing heat, reflecting fire, and forcing every flame-based attack to consume more mana just to exist. Even with the assistance of Manatech enhancements built into his gauntlets, Cashin had felt the strain. And yet, that Druid had erased it. Cashin's gaze shifted toward where Bell had collapsed, now surrounded by medics and wardens. The molten scars across the plaza told the story clearly. The ice had not simply melted. It had been overpowered, overwhelmed, dominated. Interesting, Cashin murmured quietly to himself. He turned sharply, his voice rising into command. Stabilize the perimeter. Iron Wardens snapped into motion despite their exhaustion. Form defensive positions. Check for secondary incursions. You secure the fallen golems. I want assessment reports within the hour. Medics prioritized the critically wounded first. The newly arrived iron healers moved quickly, their tools clinking softly as they unpacked compact kits of mana-assisted instruments. Blue-white light flickered from their devices as they treated burns, fractures, and frost wounds. The smell of antiseptic alchemy mixed with scorched metal and steam. Two of the iron judges had already been lowered onto reinforced stretchers. One had an ice spear still lodged through his thigh, the frost spreading in jagged veins around the wound. The other's left arm hung at an unnatural angle, his gauntlet shattered and blackened from overexertion. Cashin's jaw tightened. They would live, but barely. He turned away, already processing. The Druid. Cranel. No incantation. No chant. No visible preparation. The magic had been immediate. Instantaneous. That alone was enough to disturb him. Around him, murmurs had begun to spread among the wardens. Did you see that? He just moved his hand, and the ground split. That wasn't casting. That was monster. Fear. Not admiration. Not yet. Fear. Cashin noted it carefully. Good. Fear meant they understood the scale of what they had witnessed. But fear, left unchecked, could rot discipline. That would need to be managed. He exhaled slowly, steadying his thoughts. I need him. The conclusion came clean and without hesitation. Not just as an asset. As a weapon. No. As something greater. If that power can be directed, Cashin thought, his eyes narrowing slightly, it would change the balance entirely. Stormcrown relied on terrain manipulation, on overwhelming control of the battlefield. But Bell had undone that advantage in seconds. That was not just useful. That was decisive. Cashin turned. I need to speak with the priest engineer. As if summoned by the thought, a familiar figure stumbled into view. Brom. The Iron Warden officer looked far from composed now. His uniform was slightly disheveled, a streak of soot ran across one side of his face, and his breathing was uneven as he pushed through the chaos toward Cashin. Sir. Brom straightened mid-step, forcing himself into form despite the exhaustion. Cashin didn't waste time. You're in charge here. Brom blinked once, surprised. Sir. Maintain order. Reinforce the gate. Prepare for a second wave. Cashin's tone left no room for debate. I will return shortly. Brom swallowed, then nodded sharply. Yes, sir. Cashin was already moving. He stepped away from the battlefield, his boots striking against cracked iron as he made his way toward the nearest command structure. The city groaned around him. Cragaroth, once a symbol of absolute control and engineered perfection, now revealed its strain. Pipes along the walls had ruptured, leaking superheated steam that screamed into the air. Some had burst entirely, leaving jagged metal edges dripping with condensation and molten residue. Mana conduits flickered erratically, their internal currents unstable without the regulating barrier. Glass panels had shattered across the building facades, leaving sharp fragments scattered across the iron floor like frozen rain. Magma channels normally sealed and controlled now leaked in places, thin streams of glowing orange seeping through cracks and pooling in shallow depressions. The heat warped the air above them, creating a constant shimmer that distorted vision. The authority of the Empire was still present, but it was wounded. Cashin did not slow. He reached the command building. The massive iron double doors stood slightly ajar, one side bent inward from pressure or impact. He placed a hand against it and pushed. The door groaned as it opened. Inside, the air was heavy, thick with heat, oil, and the metallic scent of blood. The command chamber looked as though order had been struck by a hammer and left there to ring. Heat hung in the room like a second ceiling. It settled heavily against the skin, trapping the mixed smells of scorched oil, blood, hot iron, and the acrid residue of unstable mana. The massive iron table at the center still dominated the chamber by sheer weight and presence, but whatever dignity it once carried had been reduced by the violence that had passed through here. Its dark surface was littered with scattered plate documents, some bent sharply at the corners, others warped by heat, their etched markings blurred where molten residue had kissed the metal and cooled again. Several high-backed chairs had been knocked onto their sides. One had lost a leg entirely. Near the far end of the room, an entire section of wall had been driven inward, the metal buckled and folded like softened wax, as if some invisible force had slammed into it with enough power to make the building itself remember fear. A thin stream of orange light leaked from a crack in the floor near the wall, where heat from the wounded city below was beginning to press upward. Each time the chamber groaned under a distant tremor, the light in that crack pulsed faintly. Glass from shattered lamp casings lay scattered across the iron floor, reflecting the room's uneven illumination in broken glints. Somewhere above, a damaged pipe released a steady drip of hot condensation that struck the floor with soft metallic clicks. The noise was small, but in the strange pauses between alarms and distant shouting, it became impossible not to hear. Seated behind the ruined table was the priest engineer, Dante. At first glance, he looked composed. More than composed, deliberate, almost offensively calm in a room that had clearly been struck by panic and force. He sat upright despite the state of the chamber, one hand pressing a folded cloth against a cut along his forearm. Blood had seeped into the edge of the fabric, but not enough to suggest a grave wound. His attire, part priestly vestment, part engineer's formal uniform, was stained with soot and dust, though still intact enough to preserve the impression of rank. Gold-threaded trim ran along the edges of his dark layered robes, and several small iron seals sewn into the breast and cuffs caught the light with dull gleams. He looked like a man who refused to permit disaster the satisfaction of disarranging him. But the composure was too precise, too held together. His eyes lifted the moment Cassian entered, sharp and calculating, and in them there was no confusion, only strain. To the side of the chamber, seated against the wall beneath a bank of cracked mana conduits, was another figure. Brannick. The young dwarf looked very much alive, which was more than could be said for the dignity of his present condition. Blood had dried in a dark line at his temple. His clothes bore scorch marks, cuts, and flecks of shattered glass. One sleeve had been partly burned through near the shoulder. He sat with one knee drawn up slightly, as if he had not yet decided whether he was injured badly enough to justify staying down or proud enough to force himself upright. His breathing had steadied, but his eyes had not. They moved between Cassian and Dante, then to the ruined room, then back again, trying to assemble meaning from a situation that had long since outrun explanation. Cassian gave him only a passing glance. Then he stepped toward the center of the chamber and placed his right hand against his chest in a formal salute. Priest engineer. Dante inclined his head in return, a gesture exact in angle and duration. Iron judge. His voice was level, though there was a hard tension beneath it now, like metal under strain. He removed the cloth from his forearm long enough to inspect the blood, then folded it once and set it beside the nearest stack of half-melted plates. What is the situation at the gates? Cassian did not hesitate. The attackers have been neutralized. The room seemed to absorb the sentence without movement. It was not relief. Not yet. It was only a brief narrowing of uncertainty. Then Cassian continued. The barrier is disabled. This time the words did not disappear into the room. They landed. Silence followed, but it was not empty silence. It had weight. It pressed into the walls and settled over the damaged table and the broken chairs and the men within the chamber like something physical. Even the slow drip from the damaged pipe seemed louder in its aftermath. Dante's expression changed. It was not panic. He was too disciplined for that. Too trained, too old in responsibility, too practiced in the management of crisis. But something in him cracked small, sharp, and visible precisely because he had been holding himself so rigidly until that moment. His jaw tightened. The muscles at the side of his face shifted. His gaze dropped, not in uncertainty, but in calculation so immediate it bordered on alarm. For the first time since Cassian had entered, Dante no longer looked like a man controlling a room. He looked like a man suddenly staring at the true shape of the fire. I see, he said at last, though the words came more slowly now. He leaned back a fraction in his chair, exhaling once through his nose, but the gesture did not restore composure. It merely bought him half a second to think. That means, he said, more quietly, that the city no longer possesses any reliable defense against direct magical assault. He did not say it like an observation. He said it like a diagnosis. His eyes flicked, almost involuntarily, toward the far wall, as if he could already see beyond it, past the command chamber, past the broken administrative halls, past the wounded gate district, and into the vast layered body of Cragaroth itself. Into the forges, the foundries, the engine halls, the residential tiers, the storehouses, the pressure systems, the conduit lines. A city built on regulation, timing, and managed force. A city now wide open. Something harder entered his gaze. "I will inform the Iron Forge Lord immediately," Dante said, straightening again. "The Iron Judges stationed across the Empire must be recalled at once. We will need every available operative and every viable defensive line concentrated here. If Stormcrown launches a second attack while the barrier remains down, you will not." Cashin's interruption did not come as a shout. It was worse than that. It came cleanly, without heat, without strain, without any sign that he had interrupted anything worth pausing over. The words cut through Dante's response with such certainty that even Brannick, sitting against the wall, felt something tighten in the room. Dante blinked once. Not from confusion. From the controlled offense of a man unaccustomed to being stopped mid-command. Cashin took one more step forward. The floor rang softly beneath his boot. "If you recall the entire division," he said, "you leave the rest of the Empire exposed." Dante's brow furrowed. The sharpness returned to his face. "This city is the industrial heart of Iron Forge," he replied, and now there was more edge in his voice, not raised, but honed. "Its engine lines, its weapon forges, its command facilities, its strategic stores, everything that allows us to wage this war at scale is concentrated here. You are asking me to gamble the Empire's core on the assumption that Stormcrown will not press its advantage. I am telling you," Cashin said, "that concentrating every judge here creates a different vulnerability, one they are capable of exploiting." Dante rose slowly from his seat. That more than anything made Brannick's stomach tighten. Dante did not rise like an angry man. He rose like a man stepping fully into his office. Into rank. Into consequence. When he spoke again, the calm remained, but it had hardened. "You presume much, Iron Judge." Cashin did not move. "I presume pattern," he answered. "Stormcrown does not strike once unless it can strike twice. If their battle mages forced us to break formation here, their shadow casters may already be moving elsewhere. Outposts, rail lines, storage depots, provincial foundries. You pull every judge back to Cragaroth, and they stop fighting a fortified city. They begin harvesting an empire." That landed. Dante's expression tightened again, this time with something closer to anger, not theatrical, not hot, but real. His fingers pressed against the edge of the table. For one brief moment, Brannick thought the priest-engineer might actually refuse him. "That is a risk," Dante said, each word carefully measured. "We may have to take in order to preserve what remains central." "No," Cashin answered, and there was steel in it now. "It is a mistake." The chamber went still again. Brannick felt it in his chest, in the way both men held themselves, in the invisible line between them. This was no longer a disagreement about deployment. This was rank testing rank. Authority testing authority. One man speaking from stewardship of the city. The other from the hidden machinery of the state that moved behind cities, armies, and governors alike. Brannick had never seen anything like it. He had grown up hearing titles. Guild masters, engine overseers, priest engineers, magistrates, regional commanders. But this felt different. This felt like discovering that above the visible structure of power, there was another one, narrower, sharper, and far more dangerous. Cashin broke the silence first. "I require custody of the Druid." Dante's eyes narrowed. "The prisoner, Bel Cranel." Cashin's gaze remained fixed on him. "And his companion." Brannick felt the words like a strike. For a moment, he honestly thought he had misheard them. His companion. That meant him. He straightened despite himself, pain flaring in his side as he did. His first reaction was confusion, then disbelief, then something uglier and hotter. Why him? What had he done beyond helping a starving stranger on the road? Why was he being folded into this, into hidden titles and command disputes and battlefield politics he did not understand? Fear came next, fast and cold. If Cashin Rook wanted custody of him, then whatever happened next would not be ordinary punishment. It would not be a fine, or a formal reprimand, or some humiliating labor assignment in a side district. It would be something else, something classified, something that reached beyond the systems Brannick had spent his whole life trying to enter. His jaw tightened. A flicker of resentment sparked in him toward Bel, toward the city, toward the impossible absurdity of being dragged from ambition into something far beyond him by a single act of kindness and one undocumented druid who was, for some reason he did not yet understand, suddenly very important. And yet, beneath the fear and resentment, there was something else too. Something he hated. Admiration. Because Cashin did not ask. He simply changed the shape of the room by deciding what it would become. Dante held his stare for a long moment. Then Cashin spoke again. Under the authority of the Shadow's Lord, you are obligated to comply. There it was. Not a threat. Not a negotiation. A mechanism deeper than politics. Brannick watched Dante's throat move in a small, unwilling swallow. The priest engineer understood the weight of those words immediately. So did Cashin. And now, in a lesser but no less chilling way, so did Brannick. This was not a matter of preference, or jurisdiction, or local authority. This was the kind of command that existed behind doors most people never even knew were there. Dante's resistance did not vanish. It compressed. That was the sharp crack Brannick saw in him, not surrender, but the forced recognition of a line he could not cross. Understood, Dante said at last. The words sounded controlled, but it had cost him something. He nodded once. You may take them. His gaze shifted then, not to Cashin, but toward Brannick. And in that look, there was something complex. Not apology. Not sympathy. Assessment. As though the priest engineer were already re-evaluating him, moving him from one category into another. From young engineer with prestigious blood to collateral variable in a larger crisis. Cashin followed the direction of that gaze and understood immediately. I see, he said. For the first time since entering the room, his attention settled on Brannick with real focus. Not as clutter in the chamber. Not as a side matter. As a person now attached to the problem in front of him. Then the Colvane family has found itself involved. He studied him for another second. Either a grave mistake. He let the words hang there just long enough for Brannick to feel the weight of them. Or a very fortunate opportunity. Brannick stared back, his mouth slightly open before he forced it shut. He did not know whether to feel insulted, threatened, or chosen. Perhaps all three. His mind raced uselessly. Grave mistake? Fortunate opportunity? To whom? For what? Was he being punished, recruited, or simply reassigned like a tool whose purpose had changed mid-use? Every instinct in him screamed that he should ask questions. But one look at Cashin was enough to kill the impulse. The man standing before him was not someone to challenge casually. And the authority he carried was no longer abstract. Brannick had just watched it override the priest engineer of Cragaroth in his own command chamber. That realization made the room feel smaller. Heavier. As though something unseen had tilted, and everyone inside it was now standing on a different slope than the one they had entered. Cashin turned away first, already finished with the discussion in his own mind. Prepare them, he said. Nothing in his tone suggested that the order might fail to be carried out. Then he began to move again, coat shifting around him in controlled dark lines as he headed back toward the door, toward the wounded city, toward whatever came next. Because for him, this was already no longer the aftermath. It was the beginning of the next phase. Thank you for listening. I truly appreciate your time and support. If you enjoyed this audiobook, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to stay updated on future content. Your support means the world to me and helps keep this channel going strong. Until next time, take care, stay awesome,